Lord of Mysteries, the Fool Brother is a Witch. By Tuo Zhang de Yi Zhe. Chapter 101-125. Chapter 101. Done and Daily. The ancient bronze palace was shrouded in a gray mist, as if covered by the river of time. Crimson stars flickered, emitting illusory and vague sounds. Klein extended his spirituality into the stars, listening to the prayer of the sun. After a long while, he sighed, what a peculiar and tragic place. The Silver City should be located in the forsaken land of the gods, right? Klein asked. Eve nodded. What kind of existence is the forsaken land of the gods? Has it really been abandoned by the gods? Klein asked curiously. Why was it abandoned? Is there any way to enter or exit the forsaken land of the gods? You might as well change your name to 100,000 Ys, Eve grumbled. The reason is very complex, Eve sighed, lowering her eyes to gaze at the desktop in front of her. It's related to the secrets of the third epoch and involves a double-digit number of gods and angels. Klein was suddenly startled. He knew that the forsaken land of the gods would inevitably involve god-level secrets, but he didn't expect there to be so many gods. The girl looked up, gazing at the fool at the head of the table, opened her mouth, and softly said, "Do you remember the Great Calamity?" The forsaken land of the gods is a product of the Great Calamity. So the Great Calamity was real. Klein mused, lightly propping his chin. From his perspective in his previous life, the records in the sacred text should contain many fabricated elements, but truth was also mixed in with the falsehoods. I remember old sister transmigrated to this world in the second epoch. Klein glanced at Eve. In that case, she should have been a witness to the Great Calamity. Suddenly, Klein hesitated whether to ask further. Logically, experiencing such a great calamity would definitely be a bad memory. This is already enough to deal with Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and the Sun, and exploring the secrets of gods is quite dangerous. Eve continued, that's probably about it. If I keep going, it will overturn your understanding. Exploring the secrets of gods also needs to be done step by step, slowly. This is enough for you to deal with them. A normal person just encountering high-level events wouldn't dare to ask further after hearing this much. As for the method to enter and exit the forsaken land of the gods. Eve pondered for 2 seconds, then said thoughtfully, the forsaken land of the gods has been sealed off. Even gods cannot directly affect it under normal circumstances, nor can they communicate with the spirit world. But some high-level existences can enter and exit the forsaken land of the gods through special methods. Ordinary people and low-sequence individuals can also enter the forsaken land of the gods, but it's difficult to get in, even harder to leave, and extremely dangerous. Ordinary people and low-sequence individuals can also enter. Klein was stunned for a moment, asking with some surprise. Yes, Eve nodded, the key lies with the true creator. True creator. Klein murmured, the forsaken land of the gods wouldn't be the sanctuary that the Aurora Order promotes, would it? Eve adjusted her posture, leaning forward as she said, whether high sequence or low sequence, it's impossible to avoid the true creator if you want to enter the forsaken land of the gods. That's right, after all, it's his territory. Even if you go in without greeting, the true creator will definitely know, and if he doesn't agree, he'll just kick you out. Unless you are stronger than the true creator, which is impossible, of course. Klein reached out and pinched his brow, a little headache. He was clearly just a weak sequence 8, why did he always get involved in matters concerning high-level existences? I also have a way to enter and exit the forsaken land of the gods, Eve mused, resting her elbow on the armrest of the chair and propping her cheek. If you need help, you can come to me. Klein's face showed a hint of surprise, then returned to normal after 2 seconds. Ouroboros's honorific, kin of the true creator, already indicated the relationship between Ouroboros and the true creator. Since Ouroboros was a kin of the true creator, it wasn't unimaginable that Eve, as Ouroboros's old sister, had a good relationship with the true creator. Wait. Klein suddenly realized something. Did calling the true creator the fallen creator at the gathering count as slandering someone else's friend in front of others? Based on Eve's description of the secret supplicant pathway and the true creator should have the authority of corruption. In that case, it shouldn't be considered slander, just as the Evernight goddess is also called the Lord of Silence. But from a normal person's perspective, using fallen to describe someone really isn't a good thing, is it? Although he had no intention of slandering, he would swear to the goddess on that point, but it was still better to explain. Even if you gave me 800 guts, I wouldn't dare to slander a god. Klein muttered in his heart, whether it's a righteous god or an evil god. I said fallen creator at the gathering. Klein paused, weighing his words. I know, Eve said, actually, you weren't wrong. All right, I'm leaving now. Eve stood up, raised her arms high, stretched, and complained, I still have class this afternoon. As her words fell, Eve's figure disappeared from Saphira Castle. Klein followed closely behind, also leaving Saphira Castle. After coming out of the washroom, Klein picked up his top hat and cane, tidied his appearance, and went to Blackthorn Security Company, preparing to inquire about Heinessen's matter. Hey, good afternoon, Klein. Roseanne immediately waved when she saw Klein enter, greeting him, why are you here? Shouldn't you be at home enjoying your rare holiday? Good afternoon, Miss Roseanne. Klein took off his hat and greeted Roseanne. A qualified gentleman, even on holiday, will not abandon his responsibilities. Ah. Oh. Roseanne tilted her head slightly, pouting and thinking for 2 seconds. You're here to see the captain, aren't you? He's in his office. After thanking Roseanne, Klein went to Dunn's door and knocked. Come in. Klein gently pushed open the door and saw the captain sitting at his desk, reading a copy of Gentleman's Aesthetics. After Klein entered, he put down the magazine, closed it, and placed it beside him. Captain, Klein sat opposite Dunn, I want to ask about Heinessen. Dunn rubbed his head, sighed, and said, he left Tingen a long time ago. Left a long time ago? Yes, Dunn said helplessly, he left after Sirius died. When the Nighthawks arrested Sirius Orepus and Hood Eugen, they accidentally killed Sirius, and Hood Eugen had already gone mad, so the Nighthawks didn't get any useful information. From the current clues, he should be a member of the Aurora Order, Dunn recalled, and Heinessen used to teach at the Seer Club. You were also at the Seer Club, have you had any contact with him? I'm sorry, Klein carefully recalled all his experiences at the Seer Club. My only contact with him was listening to one of his classes. My understanding of him is limited to his name and his knowledge of divination. Dunn didn't show any disappointment. He hadn't placed his hopes on this matter anyway. It's fine. After chatting with Dunn for a few more sentences, Klein left. The next day, Klein returned to Blackthorn Security Company feeling refreshed. He felt light after paying off his debt. Last night, Klein didn't attend class or go hunting pirates, he had a rare early night. Good morning, Miss Roseanne. Good morning, Klein. After greeting, the girl looked left and right, her furtive manner letting Klein know that she was about to start gossiping again. Klein, I have good news for you. Roseanne waved Klein over and whispered, Ms. Daly just arrived. Klein was stunned for a moment, then didn't know what expression to use to face Roseanne. Ms. Daly arrived in Tingen the day after the Spawn of Evil God incident. This famous spirit medium lived in Port Enmat, which was quite far from Tingen. She specifically swapped shifts with others, applied to leave Port Enmat, and rushed over. Although he hadn't seen her many times, from their few interactions, Klein felt that Ms. Daly should like the captain, but he wasn't sure. After thinking for 2 seconds, Klein still decided to end the topic. If it was true, that would be fine, but if it was false, it would be quite awkward. Seeing Klein's pause, Roseanne was a little angry. I'm not one of those big-mouthed girls. No, my mouth is indeed a bit big, but I'm not, a bad girl who imagines things about others behind their backs. After speaking, she looked left and right again, lowering her voice to a whisper, Ms. Daly. They went out on a date. An old voice suddenly sounded, startling the two people who were secretly discussing gossip. AD date. Klein looked shocked. The captain and Ms. Daly have already made their relationship official. When? Klein recalled their last meeting, which was after the Spawn of Evil God incident. But didn't Ms. Daly just express a few words of concern and then rush back? There was no confession. Did I lose my memory? Or has the captain evolved to the point where he can enter dreams across cities? Did he confess to Ms. Daly in a dream? All right, Old Neil chuckled, seeing Klein's shocked expression. I misspoke, it should be a meet date. Meet date. Meet date. Klein and Roseanne both showed confused expressions at the same time. The first half is a meeting, Old Neil said mysteriously, the second half is a date. What an old-fashioned gentleman, Old Neil said, pretending to be angry. Girls nowadays don't like old-fashioned gentlemen. Actually, I'm not old-fashioned at all. Klein muttered in his heart, refuting. I'm just too shocked, that's all. Are you really sure the captain will confess? Roseanne stared at Old Neil with bright eyes, asking urgently. Why must it be done? Old Neil stroked his gray beard, speaking with the air of someone who had seen it all. I think it'll be daily. So, Klein looked at the two of them, hesitating. Mr. Neil, you're not even sure if there will be a confession today, are you? From my perspective, there will definitely be a confession today. Old Neil turned to face Klein, one hand stroking his gray beard, exuding the aura of a life mentor. Mr. Neil clearly has no experience himself. Roseanne tilted her head, unable to resist complaining, yet he acts like he's seen it all. Old Neil's hand paused on his chin, his eyelids lowered slightly, his gaze falling on the skin on the back of his hand. The old man's gaze moved up from the back of his hand, finally resting on his arm. He had once had blood drawn from his arm. His dark warlock robe concealed all the wounds on his body. Roseanne looked at the silent Old Neil, suddenly realizing she had said the wrong thing, and immediately apologized. I'm sorry, Mr. Neil, What do you know? Old Neil said softly. Roseanne's heart immediately jumped to her throat, frightened into saying, I. For a long time, unable to utter a single word, so anxious that tears were about to fall. Klein's expression hardened. He took 2 steps forward and said cautiously, Mr. Neil. This is called experience, life experience, understand? Old Neil said with a displeased expression. Emperor Rosal once said, even if you haven't eaten pork, you've seen pigs run. I've seen plenty of these things. Klein and Roseanne were stunned for a moment, not reacting, just nodding continuously as they listened to Old Neil's words. 2 seconds later, Klein was the first to regain his thoughts and come to his senses, immediately letting out a sigh of relief. Roseanne patted her chest. Clearly the little girl had also come to her senses. While patting her chest, she muttered softly, You scared me to death. Seeing their reactions, Old Neil chuckled and said, Daly is a true genius. It only took her 3 years to become a spirit medium. Dunn has always been afraid to confess to her, feeling he wasn't worthy of her. I didn't expect such a thing. Klein had only been with the Nighthawks for about a month, so he wasn't clear about Ms. Daly and the captain's situation. He pricked up his ears, listening attentively. But it's fine, it's the same if Daly confesses. So, Mr. Neil, why do you think they'll confess today? Klein couldn't help but ask. I was right there when Daly asked Dunn out, Old Neil said, grinning. At a time like that, you were there. Roseanne looked at Old Neil with suspicion, her face full of disbelief. I just happened to be passing by, accidentally saw a little, and accidentally heard a little, Old Neil said. Daly didn't even dare to look at Dunn when she asked him out. It must be different from a normal gathering. Dunn actually wanted to refuse at first. Tisk tisk tisk, Old Neil said earnestly, old-fashioned and conservative. If he hadn't met Daly, he would definitely be a bachelor for life. Roseanne seriously pondered Old Neil's words. She recalled how the captain usually seemed as strict as a father, and she certainly wouldn't like that. She didn't want another captain that would mean being controlled both at home and outside, which sounded like a nightmare. Chapter 102 I Want to Embrace You. People flowed through the streets, and the pointed tops of houses built of marble or red brick on both sides were visible. The ornate colors and beautiful windows were like ladies' accessories, adorning their beauty. Miss Daly, as always, wore blue eyeshadow and a black dress. Her old-fashioned makeup and attire diminished some of her beauty. She had been transferred to the Backland Archdiocese and had come to Tingen on her way to Backland. Miss Daly secretly glanced at Dunn beside her. She had originally only intended to visit him, but for some reason, just before she was about to leave, she suddenly had a burst of impulse and asked him out. The moment the invitation left her lips, she immediately felt some regret, especially after Dunn declined. She secretly resented her own rashness. Why, oh why? A breeze passed through the branches and leaves, which gently swayed and collided, making a soft sound like wind chimes. The rustling sound drifted into the crowd with the cool breeze, dispelling some of the summer heat and vexation. A few strands of hair brushed lightly against her fair cheek, a slight tickle. Miss Daly tilted her head, looking at Dunn. The man was dressed in a formal suit, without a top hat. Perhaps due to the hot weather, a few beads of sweat had appeared on his forehead. If Klein hadn't discovered it in time then, and if Lord Sesama hadn't been there. Ah, Miss Daly, are we going to the train station? Dunn noticed Miss Daly's gaze. He took out a handkerchief to wipe the sweat from his forehead and asked somewhat uncomfortably. Miss Daly looked at Dunn intently, without the slightest concealment. Miss Daly. Dunn was startled, and tentatively called out her name. Miss Daly suddenly grabbed Dunn's wrist and half forcibly pulled him away. Dunn was startled and didn't understand Miss Daly's intention, but he still let Miss Daly pull him along. Miss Daly walked to increasingly secluded areas, with fewer and fewer people around. Dunn observed his surroundings, wondering about the possibility of them being followed. Miss Daly pulled Dunn further and further, until there was no one around, then suddenly stopped. She released Dunn's wrist, turned around, and faced Dunn. Dunn. Miss Daly silently took a deep breath, slowly lifted her foot, put it down, and approached Dunn. Now they were very close. Dunn could embrace Miss Daly if he just opened his arms. She looked up, gazing at Dunn earnestly, feeling unlike herself. I want to embrace you. Dunn's mind went blank. Suddenly, it was as if he couldn't understand Lonis, unable to grasp the meaning of her words. He half raised his arms, his hands suspended in midair, but he hesitated, fearing both missing the moment and misunderstanding, thus offending Miss Daly. Miss Daly stared intently at Dunn, then suddenly opened her arms and hugged the man tightly. Will he think I'm frivolous? In that instant, she wanted to close her eyes, but she didn't. Miss Daly forced herself to look at Dunn, to witness it all. I want to embrace you, Dunn Smith. With his beloved suddenly in his arms, Dunn's breath hitched, and his heart pounded violently, as if it would burst from his chest. I should, perhaps. I didn't misunderstand. His hands, suspended in midair, moved slightly, and his arms slowly closed, embracing the person in his arms. Why haven't the captain and Miss Daly returned yet? Roseanne cupped her teacup in both hands, gently blew on it twice, and complained with a pout, staring at the ripples on the surface of the water. Dates take a lot of time, and the captain and Miss Daly haven't been gone for very long. Miss Roseanne, Corinne replied, looking up from his newspaper. Even time speeds up when you're with your loved one. But, Roseanne put down her teacup and said somewhat anxiously, Miss Daly's train is about to depart. As her words fell, the sound of a door opening suddenly came from behind the girl, drawing everyone's attention in the room. Captain Dunn, as usual, holding his cane and pipe, walked leisurely into Blackthorn Security Company. Roseanne looked behind Dunn with some curiosity. Captain, where is Miss Daly? At the train station, Dunn said cheerfully. She took a public carriage to the train station after breakfast. You too. Roseanne pursed her lips, and asked with a hint of disbelief, you went to the train station right after breakfast? Dunn nodded somewhat confusedly, frowning as he sensed something was amiss. His intuition told him that this young girl was overthinking again, so he immediately put on his usual stern expression and silently looked at Roseanne. Mr. Neal lied to me. Roseanne was a little disappointed, thinking with a touch of grievance, and shrunk her neck, not daring to look at Dunn. Inside the Evil Dragon bar, Admiralsel sat on a chair, his hands tightly clasped, his fingers constantly scratching the back of his hands, his head resting on the table, his eyes fixed on the floor. Klein took 2 steps forward and stopped beside Admiralsel, vaguely hearing Admiralsel constantly muttering something. He leaned down and concentrated, wanting to hear clearly. I won't die, I won't die, I won't die. I won't die. Klein's body stiffened, he frowned slightly, then immediately relaxed, a trace of thought and solemnity flashing in his eyes. Did he see something? Klein tapped the edge of the table with his cane, but Admiralsel was completely immersed in his own world, showing no reaction as if he hadn't heard. Klein reluctantly reached out and vigorously shook Admiralsel twice, only letting go when he looked up. Why do you say you won't die? Klein asked, raising his hand to rub his head as he spoke, secretly tapping his glabella twice to activate his spirit vision. The color of his lungs was somewhat dim, but it wasn't a very serious problem, the overall color was very normal and healthy. He then observed Admiralsel's emotions, dark colors mixed with red. Red symbolized passion and excitement, while dark colors represented melancholy and sadness. Admiralsel had encountered something bad, but this matter was also an opportunity for him. I won't die. Did Admiralsel have a premonition that he could survive this matter? Klein immediately felt fortunate that he had found Admiralsel in time. He would not shirk responsibility for his kindness, he came today for Admiralsel. If Admiralsel became a Beander because of him, then he naturally had to take responsibility, not allowing Admiralsel to go astray and harm others. Taking him in as a Nighthawk's informant was the safest approach. Admiralsel's face immediately changed when he saw Klein. He wanted to retreat, unconsciously stomping his foot hard, but he suddenly fell backward with a bang, landing on the ground. I can't say, that woman is definitely not an official Beander, I can't say. I don't know, Admiralsel waved his arms, refusing Klein's approach, and said tremblingly, I don't know, don't ask me. His feet constantly kicked on the ground, as if he was trying to escape. Shouldn't he be standing up and running now? Klein looked at the panicked Admiralsel, silently complaining in his mind. The commotion here attracted the attention of others. Klein looked at the people around him and did not step forward. The person connected to this matter with Admiralsel could be right here, he couldn't act rashly. Klein silently retreated a few steps to avoid provoking Admiralsel, while keeping an eye on Admiralsel and observing the people around him, noting their appearance and characteristics. Scar, hooked nose. Blonde, thin and small. Blue eyes, a mole on his right hand. Golden curly hair, blue eyes. As Klein was memorizing the appearance of the blonde woman, the woman suddenly looked up at Klein and smiled faintly at him. Klein was startled, then immediately withdrew his gaze from her and turned to observe others. That woman is not right. Admiralsel looked at the retreating Klein, suddenly scrambled up from the ground, and ran outside. Klein was startled and, after a final glance, could only chase after him. Eve watched Klein and Admiralsel run out, put down her wine glass, and followed them out. Chapter 103, The Informant. He really did chase after me. Klein glanced at the blonde woman behind him, his mind racing for a solution. This is too conspicuous, Klein thought, feeling uncomfortable under the stares of passers-by. His formal attire somewhat restricted Klein's movements, but the physical enhancements from becoming a clown and his Nighthawk's combat training made him much faster than an ordinary person. Klein held his top hat with his left hand to prevent it from falling. The distance between them gradually closed, until it was only 2 meters. Klein immediately extended his left hand, wanting to grab Admiralsel. The black silk top hat slipped slightly on Klein's head. Klein's heart gave a heavy lurch, his eyes rolled upwards. He subconsciously wanted to look at his hat, but immediately pulled his gaze back, focusing his sight on Admiralsel in front of him. The hat tilted and sat askew on Klein's head, not moving further. Klein breathed a sigh of relief, his calves tensing. He sprinted 2 more steps and grabbed Admiralsel's shoulder. Admiralsel was still running forward when he was caught. Klein was pulled forward a step, his upper body suddenly leaning forward. Perhaps because the movement was too large, the black silk top hat fell from his head. The strength increase brought by Clown was far less than the speed increase. It was only slightly stronger than an ordinary person, which prevented him from immediately subduing Admiralsel. Klein tightened his grip on the cane in his right hand and kicked Admiralsel's right calf. He immediately lost his balance and fell to his right. Admiralsel's mind went blank, his hands flailing wildly in the air, suddenly grabbing something with his right hand. He didn't know what it was, but he held onto it tightly. After Admiralsel grabbed the cane, Klein immediately tilted the cane to the right, bringing Admiralsel to the ground. People had already stopped to watch. Several individuals stood on the roadside, observing Klein and Admiralsel from a distance. Klein immediately pressed down on Admiralsel with his right hand, preventing him from getting up, while simultaneously reaching into his formal attire's pocket with his left hand, pulling out his identification, and showing it to the onlookers. Upon seeing the identification, those few people quickly left one after another without Klein even needing to speak. LotM police have such a good reputation, Klein thought to himself, half-jokingly, as he picked up his hat and put it back on, then pulled Admiralsel up. Klein glanced back. The blonde woman had been following them, consistently maintaining a distance of about 5 meters. This must be a powerful Beander, Klein pondered inwardly. But 5 meters is too close, isn't it? You should at least pretend a little. What's the point of always keeping a 5-meter distance? Is it a provocation? If it's true, then this big shot has a rather twisted sense of humor, Klein grumbled inwardly, then turned to press Admiralsel and prepare to leave. Admiralsel evidently also saw the blonde woman 5 meters away and immediately fell silent, unsure how to react. Slap. Suddenly, Klein felt a pat on his shoulder. "Hello there, sir." A clear, unfamiliar female voice came from behind. Klein's body stiffened, his heart pounded twice, his grip on the cane tightened, his arms slightly raised. At the same time, he silently chanted Eve's honorific name, ready to counterattack at any moment. "I'm just here to collect a debt." The blonde woman had approached Klein's side at some point. Klein stiffly turned his head, feeling a bit anxious in his heart. For some reason, old sister hadn't responded. "You can call me." The blonde woman paused for 2 seconds, slowly raising her left hand to her face, sweeping a lock of hair aside, and then parting her red lips to say, "Warrior of Love, Homura-chan." Klein fell silent. Admiralsel looked at the two of them with a mix of fear and panic. Seeing the official Beander suddenly fall silent, he became even more flustered. "I know who she is." Klein silently took a deep breath. "You knew I would go to the Evil Dragon bar." Klein slightly raised his cane, pointing to Admiralsel as he asked. "No, no," Eve waved her hand, smiling, "I had just arrived then and happened to see you." "What a coincidence, right? I also think it's quite a coincidence, so I decided not to waste this precious fate." Admiralsel's unfocused eyes showed a hint of disbelief and shock. The woman who looked very much like a member of a secret organization actually knew the official Beander, and their relationship seemed good. "Homura-chan is an official Beander." "No, that's not right, she's very dangerous." Klein noticed Admiralsel's clearly abnormal expression and immediately felt a headache. He didn't even need to ask, he could guess it was definitely old sister's doing. He silently sighed in his heart and said, "Let's go somewhere else for a friendly discussion, Mr. Admiralsel may have some misunderstandings." As he spoke, Klein released his grip on Admiralsel's shoulder, tapped his cane on the ground twice, and led the two of them to a secluded, uninhabited spot. "Homura-chan, miss." Admiralsel enunciated each syllable, trying his best to get every pronunciation right. "Her name isn't Homura-chan, nor is that her code name." Klein raised a hand and rubbed his temples, saying, "You can call her." Klein paused, carefully observing the clothes in front of him. Long, voluminous golden curly hair, blue eyes, ordinary appearance, nothing memorable. Since she had already changed her appearance, it would be better to use a fake name. "Alice," Eve spoke first, "my name is Alice." That's a normal name, Klein thought, glancing at Eve's golden curly hair. Mr. Admiralsel is not a Beander yet, but he certainly won't give up on becoming one. Klein tapped the ground with his cane, attracting Admiralsol's gaze. It's just a pity that he was discovered by an official Beyander before he even became one. Admiralsol subconsciously took a step back. He clearly knew that wild Beyonders were not tolerated by official Beyonders. Admiralsol repeated blankly, I won't die, I won't die. Yes, you won't die. Klein tapped the ground with his cane again, the dull thud bringing Admiralsol back to his senses. Official Beyonders won't kill all wild Beyonders, that would make them no different from cultists. You can choose to become an informant for the Nighthawks. Not only will you face far fewer dangers, but you can also receive funds and Beyander materials from the church. Admiralsol remained blank for 2 seconds, then reacted, turning his unfocused eyes towards Eve. Eve smiled without speaking. Admiralsol turned his head back, his eyes still unfocused, and nodded as if sleepwalking. The cover has been changed. Many thanks to Flower Night Sleepless for freely providing the cover. The cover features Eve, Little Klein, and Little Rui. Chapter 104, Déjà Vu. Seeing Admiralsol nod, Klein silently breathed a sigh of relief. This was already the best outcome. I will report this to the captain. Klein noticed Admiralsol's unfocused and wandering eyes, and suggested, do you need my help finding materials? Admiralsol's uncontrollable Beyander characteristic was causing him immense pain, so the sooner he became a Beyander, the better. The current Klein knew quite a few Beyander gathering places. Admiralsol nodded, his eyes vacant, unsure if he had truly accepted it. Klein sighed and gave him a few more instructions, repeating the key points several times to ensure he heard them. He wasn't annoyed. Compared to the crazy and uncommunicative Admiralsol he had met before, the current Admiralsol was much easier to talk to. Admiralsol looked at Klein, but it was unclear if he had taken in what was said. A few seconds later, he lowered his head, reached into the pocket of his greasy blue jacket with his right hand, and pulled out a slightly rusted small knife. He actually had a knife. Klein's eyes widened slightly, looking at the small knife in Admiralsol's hand with some surprise. It was a good thing he didn't pull out the knife during their argument, otherwise the nature of this matter would have changed. Klein thought with a hint of relief. His wrinkled hand pulled open his jacket. Sewn inside the jacket was a small, gray cloth pouch, bulging as if it contained something. Admiralsol pressed down on his jacket with his arm, then extended 2 fingers of his left hand to pinch and rub the gray cloth pouch twice, then pulled outwards with a slight force. The gray cloth pouch seemed to be trying to escape with all its might, struggling, but only managed to lengthen and straighten the chain. He placed the small knife against the white thread, and with a slight flick, the chain broke, creating a small opening. One cut after another, until a sufficiently large opening was made. Admiralsol tightly clutched the gray cloth pouch and pulled hard, tearing it off with a ripping sound. Klein looked at Admiralsol's palm. Inside the gray cloth pouch was something wrapped in newspaper. Admiralsol carefully unwrapped the newspaper, revealing the true contents. It was gold pounds. Klein observed carefully. There were both coins and notes, and the amount seemed considerable. Admiralsol held the money in both hands, wanting to hand it to Eve. Klein followed Admiralsol's gaze to Eve. It was a transaction. Eve waved her hand and said, he bought my formula for 100 pounds. So he really came to collect a debt. 100 pounds. The price of a normal sequence 9 formula is between 220 and 450 pounds. This discount is too big. No wonder Admiralsol felt old sister had ill intentions. Klein complained in his heart. However, Klein glanced at the money in Admiralsol's hand. There were many sower and pennies. Even with such a large discount, the price of the formula was not something an ordinary person could afford. This must have been Admiralsol's savings from many years. He didn't know what Admiralsol's job was, but even a high-paying profession like a lawyer couldn't easily produce 100 pounds, let alone Admiralsol, who probably wasn't in such a high-paying profession. Klein raised his hand and pushed Admiralsol's hand back, saying, I'll pay these 100 pounds for you first. You can pay me back 2 pounds each month until the full 100 pounds is repaid. If you provide useful information, you can offset part of the debt. How about that? Admiralsel was stunned for a moment, looked at Eve, and immediately nodded after seeing the blonde woman nod. After explaining everything that needed to be said, Klein, Eve, and Admiralsel bid farewell and left. You're really rich, Eve said with a hint of teasing in her tone. How can I compare to you? Klein said with some envy, I hope you can give me a discount like Admiralsel's in the future. Eve smiled and said, that's certainly impossible, but discounts aren't entirely out of the question. I'll grudgingly give you an 80% discount. I also need to earn money to support my family. Rhodes Islands. Inside the tavern, the smell of alcohol mixed with body odor constantly assailed Audrey's nose. I should have listened to Rui and Susie, and gone to a quiet and clean tavern. Just a little bit of quiet and cleanliness would have been enough. Audrey sat crouched before a wooden table, her dignified posture making her seem exceptionally out of place. A full glass of beer sat before the young girl, seemingly untouched. She sat in the tavern like a spectator watching a play, observing the people within the establishment. Yet, none of the actors noticed this exceptionally beautiful spectator. Oh, how annoying. A charming and alluring voice came from outside. A bronze-skinned muscular man, with his arm around a curvaceous woman with black curly hair, entered the tavern. Bartender, 1 gade beer, 1 absinthe. As soon as the man entered, his booming voice echoed throughout the entire tavern. Immediately, everyone in the tavern looked at him, and also noticed the alluring beauty beside him. The muscular man stood tall, his back straight, his chest puffed out like a victorious general. He felt an itch in his heart, and at sea, no one didn't know what such an itch came from. The hand around her slender waist subtly moved downwards. Slap. Oh dear, Lena's fair fingers poked the man's chest. Her beautiful eyes glared at him with a mix of blame and resentment, and she playfully scolded, "Stinky man." Ha 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 ha, the man burst into laughter, flirting with the beauty in front of everyone, enjoying their envious glances. You like it stinky, don't you? As he spoke, he pulled Lena into a tight embrace, pressing her soft bosom against his hard chest. Everyone is watching. Lena seemed a little shy, struggling twice in the muscular man's arms, her softness rubbing against his chest, making the itch in his heart even stronger. Let them watch, it's even better if they watch. Audrey lowered her head and covered her eyes. She now desperately wished she had an extra pair of hands so she could cover her ears. When had she ever witnessed such a scene? Those ladies and gentlemen who had affairs always went to the garden. She had heard that the sea was chaotic, but this was her first time encountering public flirting. Audrey stood up, wanting to leave this place. Most of the people in the tavern were focused on the muscular man and Lena, and even if they weren't, they wouldn't care who left. Lena, however, looked over, seemingly displeased that her charm hadn't captivated the cloaked person. This figure, is it a woman? Lena speculated while flirting with the man. This conclusion made her feel a little better. It was indeed harder for a demoness to seduce someone of the same sex than someone of the opposite sex. Audrey noticed the gaze from behind her and subconsciously looked back. Lena's heart skipped a beat, her pupils constricting. Could it be a high-ranking demoness? A high-ranking demoness with a low presence. This déjà vu is too strong. Lena immediately lost all interest in flirting. Chapter 102s, please don't buy duplicates. The specific reason was posted last night, but many people didn't see it, so it was posted again in the comment section today. Copy. Sumimasen, dear readers. When Chapter 102 was first posted, it didn't go through and showed, under review. I couldn't directly modify and repost it while it was under review, so I copied it, made some changes, and posted it again. It went through immediately. However, the first posted chapter eventually passed review, and VIP chapters cannot be deleted, so now it has become like this, with 2 Chapter 102s. Chapter 105, 2 Younger Brothers. Thanks to Clown's ability to manage expressions, Klein thought to himself. After saying that embarrassing and Chunabu-like line, Klein maintained his usual expression, as if the person who said it wasn't him. Leonard tugged at his slightly long hair, thinking hard. He scrutinized himself for a while, and it seemed there was nothing special about him, at least on the surface. He then looked at Klein, who also didn't seem to have anything special about him. Leonard looked at himself for a moment, then at Klein, and finally tilted his head, muttering softly, "Old man, I think Klein should be a favored one." "Hey," an aged voice echoed in Leonard's mind. "I'd rather believe your colleague and he are mother and son or older sister and younger brother." "What?" Leonard's eyes immediately widened, his face filled with astonishment and shock. For a moment, he forgot to control his volume and shouted it out directly. He nervously glanced at the door. The soundproofing of the lounge was quite good, but with Leonard's volume just now, if someone happened to be standing nearby, they could have heard him completely. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. There was no sound from outside the door, nor did anyone push it open and enter. Leonard let out a sigh of relief, then immediately lowered his head and whispered, "How is that possible? Klein has his own parents. He also has a younger sister and an older brother." Although Leonard's voice was very soft, because they were very close, Klein's enhanced 5 senses could completely catch Leonard's voice. Klein looked at Leonard with some curiosity. What did the angel inside Leonard say? How did it involve my parents? And Melissa and Benson? That's just an exaggeration. I didn't really guess that the two are mother and son or older sister and younger brother. In fact, he has no descendants, only 2 younger brothers who are not related by blood, Pales said helplessly. His attitude towards your colleague isn't like that towards an ordinary favored one. Leonard. Seeing Leonard still tilting his head, listening intently to the words of the angel inside him, Klein called out with some curiosity, "What did His Highness say? Why would it involve my family?" Nothing, Leonard said, somewhat awkwardly, remembering the old man's words. The old man said he would rather believe you and that His Highness are mother and son or older sister and younger brother, but this is just an exaggeration, he didn't really think that. Klein's heart skipped a beat, but he smiled nonchalantly on his face. In reality, he broke out in a cold sweat. So terrifying, as expected of an angel who has lived for 1,000 years. Thinking about it, it's impossible. You have your own parents, older brother, and younger sister, and that His Highness also has his own relatives. The old man said that His Highness has no descendants, but has 2 younger brothers who are not related by blood. Leonard snapped his fingers, recounting Pales's words completely and truthfully. 2. One is Ouroboros, and the other. The younger brothers mentioned by that angel certainly don't include me. Clown's ability kept Klein's face from showing any abnormalities, but he could actually feel his heart beating violently, thumping again and again, as if it wanted to break free from the confines of his chest. Klein recalled everything he could remember. Memories floated before his eyes like foam, then quickly receded, and he felt as if he had become a detective, searching for clues among all the hints. My current family consists only of Ruarui, you, and Ouroboros. Ouroboros is my adopted younger brother, and he knows I've been looking for you. Current. Klein remembered the box in Eve's storeroom, Ouroboros and Medici. He opened his mouth, then slowly closed it 2 seconds later. Klein. Although Klein's face showed no change, Leonard instinctively felt that Klein seemed to have become a bit off. Hearing Leonard's voice, Klein looked up at him, gripping his cane tightly, his fingers rubbing the handle. His lips moved a few times, and he spoke, "Medici and Ouroboros are his younger brothers, right?" Pales said with some surprise, "He even told your colleague that." Leonard didn't quite understand, but he immediately nodded to Klein. According to the old man, it should be. I understand. Klein gripped his cane tightly and tapped the ground. I still have some things to do, I'll be leaving first. Ah. Leonard was stunned. Okay, then I'll see you tomorrow. Klein picked up the top hat from the sofa, put it on his head, and left Blackthorn Security Company as usual. Of course, he couldn't ask Miss Eve about Medici. No matter what the matter was, from the current outcome, it shouldn't be a pleasant memory. Klein returned home and sat at his desk. He leaned back, his neck resting against the back of the chair, his eyes unfocused as he stared at the ceiling. After a long while, Klein withdrew his gaze. In front of him, on the desk, lay Rosel's aphorisms copied in ancient Elvish. Klein stared at them blankly. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Klein flipped over Rosel's aphorisms, revealing a fresh sheet of paper, picked up his fountain pen, and wrote in Chinese. 1. After advancing to sequence 7. 2. After Benson passes the exam. After writing this line, Klein held his pen, hesitating to continue writing. The ink from the pen slowly seeped into the paper. A breeze, carrying a hint of heat, blew by. The university was already empty, enjoying the summer vacation, while other schools were still bustling with people. Although there was no summer vacation, Melissa's school was relatively relaxed, with classes 6 days a week, ending early in the afternoon. Because it was on the way, Melissa would stay at Miss Eve's house for a short while after school, asking questions or researching machinery, preparing for the university entrance exam in June next year. Today, as usual, Melissa and Miss Eve came to the roadside together to wait for the public carriage. Feeling the gazes of the men and women around her, Melissa sighed inwardly. In her opinion, Miss Eve was very good, but unfortunately too beautiful, otherwise she might have introduced Miss Eve to Benson and Klein. Clip clop clop. A carriage stopped by the road outside the school. A gentleman with bronze skin and a black mole behind his ear stepped out of the carriage. Azek looked around and easily found Miss Eve in the crowd. Miss Eve. Azek quickly took 2 steps and came to the 2 young ladies. Good afternoon, Miss Eve. I apologize for disturbing you. You are an excellent lady. Azek paused, then continued, trustworthy. I have no other intentions, I just hope you can think again. Do you really not know me from before? 2 Chapter 102s, please don't buy duplicates. The specific reason was posted last night, but many people didn't see it, so it was posted again in the comments section today. Copy. Sorry, dear readers, Chapter 102 didn't get posted the first time. It showed, under review. You can't directly modify and repost when it's under review, so I copied it, modified it, and posted it, and it went through directly. As a result, the first chapter that was posted passed review, and VIP chapters can't be deleted, so now it's like this, 2 Chapter 102s. Second edit, the title can actually be changed. Why can't the title of Transfer Student be changed no matter what, but this chapter can? Anyway, this way, no one should buy duplicates, right? Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 106, I am the protagonist of this era. Klein carefully observed Eve, finding it a bit novel to see Eve's avatar for the first time. Her eyes were very lively, and her movements and expressions were the same as usual. If he hadn't known, it would have been hard to imagine that the blonde woman in front of him wasn't a real person. After 2 seconds, Klein withdrew his gaze. How are you getting along with Melissa? Since he ran into her, Klein took the opportunity to ask, as Melissa rarely mentioned school matters at home. Don't worry, Eve extended her right hand to make an okay gesture, then proudly patted her left shoulder and said, progress is steady, moving forward steadily. Klein nodded. He was quite confident in his old sister regarding this matter. Although she could be a bit unreliable at times, she was quite dependable when it came to important things. But however, Klein lowered his head, looking at the road ahead, a sense of confusion and irritation rising in his heart. The Clown Beander potion could be digested within 2 months. What should he do after that? Apply to become a Red Gloves and leave, or wait half a year until Benson passed the civil service exam before leaving? Klein always found himself unable to face this matter rationally and calmly. Klein outlined spheres of light in his mind, using meditation to pull back his rationality and calmness. He turned his head to look at Eve, then, after a long moment, withdrew his gaze and said nonchalantly, I need to go to Blackthorn Security Company. See you tonight. Eve smiled and said, okay, and pick up that £100 while you're at it. Hearing this, Klein's heart ached a little. Although he knew he could get the £100 back, losing £100 all at once still made him feel a pang of distress. He gripped his cane tightly, trying not to think about the £100 he was about to lose, and turned to leave. After the two parted, Eve withdrew her avatar. Upon arriving at Blackthorn Security Company, Klein described Admiral Sol's matter in detail, only omitting Eve's part and replacing her with a female Beander at a gathering. After completing the report, Klein adjusted his top hat and walked towards the main entrance of Blackthorn Security Company. "Hey, good afternoon, Klein, Roseanne." The black-haired, green-eyed midnight poet still looked like a romantic wanderer, exuding a poet's charm. His black coat was only fastened with 2 buttons, and his shirt hem was only tucked in on one side, with the other half loosely exposed. Leonard, with a hint of pride on his face, said to Klein, "I'm applying for a promotion, a special promotion." "Poet, the person in front of you is a seer who ascended to sequence 8 in just over half a month." Klein inwardly complained. "Congratulations," Klein replied, "that's really impressive." Leonard, however, looked a little embarrassed, but still with a hint of pride. He lowered his head and whispered, "After all, we are the protagonists of this era." "Still so Chunabu." Klein's mouth twitched. But a grandpa-like mentor is indeed a classic protagonist template. Leonard straightened up, scratched his head, and said with some annoyance, "But after my promotion, I'll apply to become a Red Gloves, so I'll be leaving you all." Why suddenly become a Red Gloves? And Leonard's expression doesn't look like he requested it himself. Klein frowned, guessing the reason in his heart. It might be because of the angel inside Leonard. Roseanne's gossipy little ears immediately caught the important information. "You're leaving, Roseanne." The captain's voice made Roseanne instinctively shrink her head, then she realized she hadn't done anything wrong and straightened her back again. Dunn, holding his pipe in one hand, placed it on the cabinet and said seriously, "If Leonard can become a Red Gloves, he will have better development." "I know," Roseanne pouted and said, "I just don't want to part with Leonard." "Red Gloves actually have plenty of time." Leonard rubbed the back of his head and comforted, "I'll come back often." The handsome, green-eyed poet smiled and said, "Let's go to a restaurant the night before I leave." "My treat." Dunn said with a serious expression, "The selection for Red Gloves is very strict." "I know," Leonard replied as usual, evidently not understanding what the captain meant. "Is he really that dense?" Klein inwardly complained. "The captain means for you not to be careless. You haven't passed the exam yet, poet." Dunn sighed and said nothing more, only telling Leonard to prepare well. Because of this sudden event, Klein stayed in Blackthorn Security Company for a while longer, then sat in the lounge waiting for Leonard, preparing to confirm something. Why suddenly become a Red Gloves? After seeing Leonard, Klein pushed the coffee in front of him towards Leonard and asked. There were only the two of them in the lounge, but Leonard still glanced left and right. When his eyes darted to the sides, Klein knew he had guessed correctly. Leonard leaned closer to Klein and whispered, "The old man told me to apply to become a Red Gloves. He said that Tingen is no longer suitable for him." Unsuitable. Is it because old sister's true body has arrived in Tingen? Or is it because of the reasons behind the Spawn of Evil God incident? Klein speculated in his heart. Old sister and the angel inside Leonard had met before, so it shouldn't be because of him. Is it the high-level existence involved in the Spawn of Evil God incident? Klein didn't understand the existence behind it, and didn't even know how many high-level existences were involved. The true creator, old sister, the angel inside Leonard could also be counted, and there was also that high-sequence spectator. But the Spawn of Evil God incident was already over. Would those high-level existences still be watching Tingen? Klein's fingers tapped his cane, and he frowned in thought, realizing he still had too little information. Leonard looked at the suddenly silent Klein, ruffled his slightly messy medium-length hair, and asked softly, "Klein, what exactly is your relationship with that existence?" Klein was startled and didn't know how to answer for a moment. His lips moved a few times, and finally, he said, "I am his favored one." This was the only excuse Klein could think of in a few seconds. Leonard's expression immediately became strange. Klein, the old man said that the level of attention that existence gives you far exceeds that of a favored one. Perhaps he just pays a lot of attention to his favored one, Klein explained with difficulty. No, 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 Leonard waved his hands repeatedly. He had another favored one before you, but his attention to that favored one was far less than to you. Perhaps it's because I'm special, Klein immediately explained. Today, even if God Almighty came, I would still be Eve's favored one, unless it was the goddess. Leonard scrutinized Klein up and down and asked doubtfully, "What makes you special?" Klein was silent for a second, then, with his upper teeth pressed against his molars, he managed to squeeze out a few syllables. "I am the protagonist of this era, what's not special about that? Regarding extra chapters will definitely be added, not only for chapter 102 but also for the cover. However, I've been quite busy recently, so it will be on Friday and Saturday. Regarding updates, stable updates will begin next month. If I can't update, I will take leave and explain the reason. Starting next month, I will be a qualified author. Second edit. I just saw a suggestion from a reader to revise the original text. Readers who have subscribed should clear their cache and re-download. I've decided to try it tomorrow. If it works, I'll change the duplicated chapter to chapter 104. Chapter 107, A Dream. Melissa frowned, stepped forward, and actively positioned herself between Eve and Azek. Another one, Melissa thought sullenly to herself. Sir, your pickup line has already been used. Azek paused, seeing the girl, who bore some resemblance to Klein, with a hint of wariness in her eyes. He then glanced at Eve, immediately understood, and took a step back. I apologize, Azek said, carefully choosing his words. I have some private matters I need to discuss with Miss Eve. Why do private matters need to be discussed with Teacher Eve? Melissa asked, frowning, the vigilance in her eyes growing more apparent. Melissa, Eve said, putting a hand on Melissa's shoulder from behind her, I know this gentleman. He is a trustworthy gentleman. Melissa. Azek felt like he had heard that name before. He lowered his head and pondered for a couple of seconds before tentatively asking, Melissa Moretti. Melissa frowned, looking at Azek. After searching her memories for a while, she confirmed that she had never met him. Azek smiled indifferently, his smile carrying a hint of benevolence. I am Azek Eggers, Klein's teacher. Melissa suddenly understood and immediately felt embarrassed, her face flushing. She quietly took 2 steps back, revealing Eve behind her. I'm very sorry, Mr. Eggers, I thought. The girl did not continue speaking. Azek did not take this matter to heart. Seeing the girl's practiced movements, it was likely not the first time she had done this. Eve's appearance was indeed too beautiful. Melissa looked up, secretly glancing at Azek. Klein said that Mr. Azek is an excellent gentleman. If it wasn't a pickup line, then what did he mean? Did they really know each other before, and Teacher Eve just forgot? As she pondered, a hint of sympathy appeared in Melissa's eyes as she looked at Azek. Is there something, Mr. Azek? Eve asked. The man with the bronze skin looked at Melissa in front of him, hesitated for 2 seconds, then said, carefully choosing his words, actually, it's nothing important. It's just that I've been having some strange dreams recently, and I'd like to ask Miss Eve to help me interpret them. He wasn't sure if Melissa knew about Beander matters. If she didn't, Klein must have deliberately kept it from her, so for safety's sake, he kept it concealed. Dream interpretation. Melissa looked at Eve suspiciously, with a hint of disbelief in her eyes. She hadn't expected that 2 teachers, as highly educated intellectuals, would actually believe in divination and dream interpretation. Melissa's gaze towards the 2 became a little strange, like a heartbroken mother looking at 2 excellent sons who had gone astray. Melissa loved machinery and rationality more than mystery. For dream interpretation, Mr. Eggers, it would be better to find a professional seer. Although Melissa didn't really believe in these things, she still gave serious advice. Haha, Eve suddenly chuckled, a hint of slyness in her eyes. That's right, I happen to know a seer club in Tingen. There are many excellent seers there, Mr. Azek might want to check it out. It seems Teacher Eve really is a mysticism enthusiast, Melissa thought silently to herself, making a mental note of the Seer Club. Thank you very much, Azek curved his lips, his steady voice sliding out. If I have time, I will definitely go. But today, I still hope Miss Eve can interpret my dream, as this is why I came, Azek asked, does Miss Eve have time? Of course, Eve turned to Melissa, Melissa, do you want to come along? Melissa refused without hesitation. She wasn't interested in such things. Rather than watching others interpret dreams, she preferred to go to the store to buy some mechanical parts to make puppets. She had previously given Klein a puppet, but he unfortunately mistook it for a turtle. Perhaps it was really due to the material. She had saved 2 weeks' worth of pocket money and planned to buy better materials to make another one for Klein. Watching the two leave, Melissa suddenly worried whether Klein would be influenced by his teacher and start liking those strange things. Actually, it wouldn't matter if he did, as long as he didn't perform those dangerous rituals, inside the Hoi University faculty office. Azek placed a cup of lightly fragrant black tea beside Eve's hand. Thank you. Eve picked up the black tea, gently blew on it twice, then took a small sip. Azek sat opposite Eve, carefully recalling the dream, and choosing his words carefully. Logically speaking, it was not strange for anything odd or unreasonable to appear in a dream. However, Azek's dream, though absurd, was exceptionally clear, like watching a play. Moreover, this was not the first time, and Azek was very certain that the lady in front of him must be connected to his past. Miss Eve, I apologize for disturbing you again. Azek took a silent deep breath, his eyes fixed on Eve. This time I invited you because I truly hope Miss Eve can help me interpret my dream. I dreamt of Miss Eve, or rather, again. Azek paused, discreetly observing Eve, hoping to find a flaw in her expression or actions. Eve showed a hint of surprise on her face and smiled, Mr. Azek, dreaming of a lady multiple times can be quite troubling for that lady. Azek still looked at Eve, not averting his gaze. He smiled, not minding the harmless joke, as he was no longer a naive young man. Miss Eve, you know I don't mean it that way. Azek continued, last time in my dream, Miss Eve was a florist, and this time, Miss Eve had many identities. A history teacher, a makeup artist, a beast tamer, with the history teacher appearing most frequently. It's very difficult for one person to engage in so many professions. Eve put down her teacup and replied seriously. Yes, it's very difficult for one person to engage in so many professions. Azek pressed his lips together, his lips moving twice before he finally spoke, but there are always some special people in the world. Eve smiled, Mr. Azek thinks I am a special person, with special abilities. That's just a guess. Azek shook his head, he didn't know what Eve would do after being exposed. I do possess some special abilities. In fact, there are many people in this world who possess special abilities. Eve admitted frankly, however, regarding Mr. Azek's past, I might actually know something. The premise is that he really is Mr. Azek. I once met someone identical to Mr. Azek, but his name wasn't Azek Eggers, but John Aberk, a knight, and he has long since passed away. Azek froze, looking down at the tabletop in front of him, deep in thought for a long time. Can you tell me Mr. Aberk's address when he was alive? I'm sorry, Eve shook her head. My relationship with him was merely acquaintance, I don't know his address. Azek said with some disappointment. If they were merely acquaintances, then he wouldn't be able to get more information about John Aberk from Eve. Where did Miss Eve meet Mr. Aberk? John County. John County, Azek frowned. John County was very far from Tingen. I understand, Azek said. Thank you very much, Miss Eve. You're welcome. Eve stood up and said to Azek, I wish you an early recovery of your past. Thank you. Chapter 108. When will we separate? Klein leaned back, his head resting on the chair, and pinched his brows in distress. Then he suddenly sat up straight, stood, grabbed a newspaper from the living room, and walked towards the washroom. After entering the washroom, Klein locked the door, closed the toilet lid, placed the newspaper on the toilet, walked 4 steps counterclockwise, and silently chanted in his heart. Immortal Venerable who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Heavenly Lord who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. God who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. Familiar whispers sounded in his ears. After numerous entries and exits, Klein had begun to adapt to these whispers, no longer feeling as if he would die in the next second as he once did. The layers of whispers receded, and the surroundings returned to silence. Klein sat upright on the bronze chair and materialized paper and pen. On the paper, he wrote, 1. After advancing to sequence 7. 2. After Benson passes the exam and becomes a government employee. After 2 seconds of thought, he wrote on another piece of paper, the time and place of Benson's civil service exam. After writing, Klein checked it once, confirmed it was correct, crumpled the paper in his hand, lay back, and in his mind, outlined countless orbs of light, using meditation to quickly fall asleep. In his dream, Klein saw Tingen bustling with people, dressed in winter clothes. In an instant, the scene changed, and a somewhat unfamiliar city appeared before Klein. Ear-piercing roars emanated from factories, and a haze of smoke permeated the city. In some places, it was so thick that pedestrians were invisible, as if swallowed by the fog. Meanwhile, in the prosperous areas of the city, the rich and nobles were enjoying balls and refreshments, with an air of extravagance and money circulating in the air. A place name surfaced in Klein's mind, Backland, the city of 10,000 capitals. Klein opened his eyes and wrote down the 2 locations, one above the other. It seems both are in winter, but I don't know the exact month. Klein took out his citrine pendulum and silently chanted in his heart, Benson's civil service exam in Tingen is in January 1350. Benson's civil service exam in Tingen is in January 1350. Quote. Benson's civil service exam in Tingen is in January 1350. After chanting 7 times, Klein stared intently at the pendulum. Under his gaze, the citrine slowly began to rotate counterclockwise. No. Klein lifted his hand, and the citrine pendulum arced into his hand. He put the pendulum down again, holding the silver chain, and after the crystal stabilized, he silently chanted in his heart. Benson's civil service exam in Tingen is in February 1350. Quote. Benson's civil service exam in Tingen is in February 1350. Not that either, Klein thought to himself, looking at the counterclockwise rotating pendulum. Again, and again, Klein repeated many times before divining the specific times of Benson's exams. One was in early December 1349, in Tingen, and the other was in late January 1350, in Backland. He wrote down the 2 time points after the place names respectively. Damn it! Klein looked at the words on the paper and discovered a very serious problem: New Year. There was a New Year between Benson's 2 exams. In this world, New Year is also a very important festival, symbolizing reunion. He had actually forgotten about New Year. Klein annoyedly covered his head, his mind a mess. A festival of reunion, these 2 worlds really have many similarities. I wonder how Mom and Dad are in that world. The flow of time in the 2 worlds should be different, right? The time my old sister and I performed the ritual should be about the same, but the time of our transmigration differed by 3,000 years. If that's the case, Mom and Dad probably haven't discovered our disappearance yet. Thinking this, Klein felt a little better, but still bitter. Klein gave a wry smile, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him. If Benson and Melissa knew that the one celebrating New Year with them was me, and not the original Klein, what would they think? Klein himself didn't believe he was the original Klein, but a different Klein. No. Klein suddenly sat up straight. I cannot tell them this bad news after New Year. I cannot let Benson, Melissa, and Klein happily celebrate New Year and then tell them that Klein died long ago, and the one celebrating New Year with them is a Klein from another world who occupied Klein's body. Klein picked up the pen and crossed out the second option. After crossing out the second option, only the first option remained on the paper. He definitely had to confess before New Year. In that case, he wouldn't be able to wait until Benson became a government employee and earned a considerable income, Benson's weekly salary could maintain a normal life, but the problem was rent and the maid's wages. I can secretly pay the rent and wages, which would lessen the financial burden on Benson and Melissa. I just don't know if they would accept it. If they directly gave up the house and dismissed the maid after I left, they shouldn't do that, right? Klein slowly lowered his head, resting his forehead on the edge of the table. New Year is a festival of reunion. Maybe Benson and Melissa will think of the meaning of New Year, and their hearts will soften and they'll let me come back, Klein thought with a bitter smile, his eyes aching. He arched up, pressing his eyes to the tabletop, not thinking of anything, just lying there. Saphira Castle was very quiet, too quiet, with only him. Klein secretly touched his chest. He could feel his heart beating, vibrant and strong, as if it had never stopped. After a long while, Klein raised his head, lay back, his head resting against the back of the bronze chair, and stared blankly at the dome. Dense gray fog filled the space, flowing like a tangible substance through every corner, and deep red stars broke through the confines of the gray fog, emitting faint light. In his mind, white glowing spheres were outlined one by one, bringing Klein a sense of tranquility. It's late July now, 2 months later is September, so I should leave in October. Klein withdrew his gaze and calculated in his heart. After confessing, Benson and Melissa would need a long time to carefully consider their relationship, at least 2 months. After 2 months, Benson and Melissa should be able to calm down and examine their relationship. Leaving in October, relocating to Backland, 2 months later is New Year, and 3 months later Benson will come to Backland for his exam. There were exactly 2 favorable time points for him. The reunion meaning of New Year might soften Benson and Melissa's attitude, and for the January exam, Benson and Melissa might come to Backland with complex feelings to visit him. Klein gave a wry smile. Why does it feel like enemies, analyzing the enemy's situation before battle? Actually, I could use divination, but I don't want to. Klein picked up the pen and slowly put it down, the nib resting after the first option. Ink slowly seeped out, forming an ink dot at the tip. After a long while, the fountain pen trembled, and the nib scratched across the white paper, leaving a small check mark. Klein looked at the small check mark on the paper, and it took him a long time to come back to his senses. The paper and pen gradually dissipated like foam. Klein lay back and left Saphira Castle. After returning home, Klein picked up the newspaper from the toilet and exited the washroom. In the living room, the maid Bella was cleaning. Klein turned and said, "I'm going to rest. You don't need to clean my room." "All right, Mr. Klein." Bella immediately straightened up when she heard her employer's voice and looked at Klein. Upon seeing Klein, Bella paused. "Mr. Klein, you don't look so good. Are you feeling unwell?" "Just a bit tired," Klein said, opening his door with a click. "I'll be fine after a short rest." As soon as he returned to his room, Klein collapsed onto the bed, his hands spread out, staring blankly at the ceiling. He remained in this state for a very long time, until the maid Bella knocked on his door. "Mr. Klein, dinner is ready." Klein's brown eyes gradually regained some spirit. He came back to his senses, realizing it was already night and Benson and Melissa had returned. "I know," Klein replied, propped himself up with his hands on the bed, used his waist to exert force, and stood up from the bed. He walked to the door, his hand gently resting on the doorknob. Outside the door were Benson and Melissa. He could hear their voices, muffled and not very clear. Click. Klein pressed down on the handle, the door opened, and he walked out. Klein. Hearing the sound, Benson closed his law book, placed it on the dining table, and looked at Klein, saying, "Have you been working hard recently? Bella said you seemed a bit tired and were resting in your room. Why do you still look so tired after resting?" Melissa's heart immediately filled with doubt. Was Klein not resting, but rather researching divination, dream interpretation, or other mystical knowledge in his room? Indeed, a little. Klein curved his lips, saying as usual, "Perhaps I should take a leave and rest properly for a while." Chapter 109. Lost. The next day, before the sunlight had reached those still asleep, Klein suddenly woke up from his bed. He had a nightmare. He dreamt that Melissa and Benson, after learning the truth, beat and scolded him, crying as they threw out all his belongings. It must have just been a dream. Klein gripped the quilt tightly, his heart thumping. Maybe I should find a seer to interpret the dream. No, I am a professional seer myself. It must just be that what you think about during the day, you dream about at night, but why was it such content? Calm down, Klein, don't panic. You are only a sequence 8, even if you wanted to, you couldn't have a precognitive dream. Klein outlined layers of white light spheres in his mind, using meditation to suppress his chaotic thoughts. He glanced out the window. The sun had already risen, and the moon hung in the western sky, casting a crimson veil over the dark ocean. The night had not completely receded, but in the distance, he could see clouds glowing with light. The sun was hiding within them, radiating light that penetrated the clouds, dyeing the sky orange-red. Klein withdrew his gaze and, by the faint light, looked at the wall clock, 4:30. He flipped out of bed, quietly changed his clothes, took his top hat from the hat stand, placed it on his head, and tucked his cane under his arm, holding it with one hand. The nightmare had robbed him of his sleep, so he might as well get up and go for a walk. He placed his hand on the doorknob, quietly and gently opened a crack, and his brown eyes peered out through the gap. After waiting a few seconds and confirming no one had been disturbed, he pushed the door open further, just enough to pass through. Klein squeezed through the door sideways, left the room, and then gently closed the door. He tiptoed, quietly and stealthily, down the stairs, through the living room, and once again gently pulled open the door, successfully leaving No. 2 Narcissus Street without disturbing anyone. Phew. Klein breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, took off his cane, and walked down the street. Tingen was exceptionally quiet now, even though Klein had deliberately lightened his steps so as not to disturb anyone, he could still hear the sound of his cane hitting the ground. Although it was summer, 4 o'clock in the morning in summer was not hot. Occasional gusts of wind blew, making it exceptionally comfortable, and Klein felt much calmer. Thump, thump, thump. The knocking sound was very obvious in the quiet environment. Klein looked in the direction of the sound. A second-floor window of an apartment in the distance opened, and Eve was watching him, resting her chin in her hand. As their gazes met, Eve smiled slightly at Klein, propped her hands on the windowsill, placed one foot on it, and jumped out of the window. Her off-white pajamas and slippers did not hinder her movements at all. She flew down from the tall building like a light butterfly. Klein stood still, watching Eve run towards him step by step. Only after Eve stood beside him did he seem to come back to his senses, turning his head away from her, silently lifting his foot, and walking forward. Eve did not speak, quietly accompanying Klein as they moved forward in the night. Klein's fingers moved, and he slightly tilted his head, secretly glancing at Eve, then quickly withdrew his gaze, silently reaching into his pocket to grasp the citrine pendulum. His thumb caressed the citrine, a cool sensation came from his fingertip. Klein took out the pendulum, stared blankly at the yellow crystal in his palm, slowly closed his hand, gradually increasing the pressure. The tip of the citrine pressed against his skin little by little, bringing a slight pain. Klein slowly placed his hand above his pocket, opening his palm little by little. The pendulum gradually slipped, returning silently to his pocket. The cool sensation disappeared. Klein's fingers moved, and it was a while before he seemed to react and withdrew his hand. "Do you want to come in and sit down?" Eve asked softly, pointing to her apartment. Klein looked up and realized they had already walked to Eve's apartment. Okay. After Eve moved to Tingen, Klein had not yet been to her home. Eve walked forward, placed her hand on the door, and pushed it forward as if casually. The wooden door receded, opening the entrance. Inside the apartment, Eve twisted the switch of the gas lamp. Click, 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 and then a snap, and the light illuminated the dark room. Klein leaned his cane against the corner of the wall and sat on the sofa, observing Eve's apartment by the light. It was very similar to Eve's apartment in Backland but much simpler. There were no photos of Eve and Ruarui on the wall, and no plush toys scattered on the living room floor, as if she did not intend to live here for long. Eve took out a bottle of red wine and 2 glass goblets from the kitchen, placed them in front of Klein, and then sat opposite him. Thank you, but no need. Drinking in the morning is not good for the stomach, Klein said, his eyes downcast, and I don't want Melissa and Benson to find out I went out drinking at 4 in the morning. Eve smiled, pushed the red wine and goblets aside, and quietly waited for Klein to speak. Klein kept his head down, not speaking. After a long time, he opened his mouth and said, I've decided. After I advance to Sequence 7, I will apply to become a Red Gloves and go to Backland with you. Why not wait until Benson becomes a government employee? Eve asked, resting her chin in her hand. Klein was startled, and a bitter smile appeared in his heart. So old sister knew all along. I can't. Klein's lips moved a few times, his hands clasped tightly, his fingers constantly scratching the back of his hands, and he said with a hint of bitterness, to celebrate the new year with them in my current identity, and then after the new year, tell them that Klein has long since passed away. I probably can't celebrate the new year with Melissa and Benson anymore. Klein smiled slightly, comforting himself, but I can celebrate the new year with you and Ouroboros. This is what they call, you win some, you lose some, right? Eve rested her chin in her hand, quietly listening to Klein speak. In fact, she hadn't celebrated the new year in a very long time. If Klein wanted to, she could call Ouroboros back, and they could celebrate a new year together. Klein exhaled softly and said, head down, I've imagined many outcomes. The best one is Melissa and Benson directly accepting me, but that's impossible. It's more appropriate to call it a fantasy than an imagination. More realistically, Melissa and Benson would slowly accept me after a long time. Klein paused, then gave a bitter smile, or not accept me, and never see me again. The worst outcome is Melissa and Benson reporting it directly to the church after finding out, saying an unknown evil spirit has possessed their family member's body. Klein's eyes were downcast, and he said depressed, at that point, I'll only be able to rely on you to save me. If possible, help me reshape a body and return the body belonging to Klein, to Melissa and Benson. It shouldn't be that heartless, right? Klein murmured to himself, no, this isn't heartless. Klein slowly raised his hands and covered his face. Meow. Ruarui pushed open the bedroom door with her head and walked out gracefully. She came to Klein's side, rubbing against his calf, seemingly comforting him. Klein slowly lowered his hands, his hand gently stroking her head. Thank you, Ruarui. Eve quietly watched Klein. Losing family members is a very painful thing. She suddenly thought of Medici and Michael. 1,000 years had washed away much pain, but whenever she thought of it, it was still hard to let go. And the news of Adam's death, though long suspected, was only known this year. Eve rubbed her temples, glanced at the subdued Klein, and said, Melissa is a very perceptive child. She should be able to sense that her brother is a little different from before, but she hasn't thought in that direction. Klein listened in silence, not knowing what to say. After a long time, he stood up and said, I need to go back. Bella wakes up very early, I need to be back before she gets up. Eve stood up and saw Klein out the door. Klein looked back, adjusted his top hat, and walked forward. Melissa, Klein looked up at the sky. The sun's territory had greatly expanded, and the crimson moon was faintly visible in the western sky. Chapter 110. Another letter arrives. Klein returned home. Everyone was still asleep, so he quietly went upstairs and entered his bedroom. He didn't take off his clothes, lying directly on the bed with a trace of the night's chill, closing his eyes, thinking of nothing. After an unknown period, Klein heard some faint movements outside his door. He knew Bella had woken up. Klein turned over, estimating Melissa and Benson's waking times in his mind. After waiting for a while, he sat up. He slowly moved his feet, walked to the door, placed his hand on the doorknob, took a deep breath, and walked out of the room as usual. Mr. Klein. Bella looked at Klein with some surprise. Usually, Klein was the last to wake up. Klein responded, explaining, I didn't sleep very well last night, so I woke up early today. Bella nodded, not suspecting anything. Klein walked into the kitchen, opened the cupboard, took out the tea caddy, and brewed himself a cup of black tea. Warm tea with a hint of fragrance lay in the porcelain white teacup. Klein carried it to the sofa. On the coffee table lay a copy of Gentleman's Aesthetics, Benson's after-dinner pastime, which Klein sometimes read too. He picked up the book, sipping his tea and flipping through the pages. After he finished his tea, Melissa and Benson also came out of their rooms one after another. "Klein is up so early today," Melissa said casually. "Because I didn't sleep very well last night, I woke up early," Klein repeated the excuse he used for Bella. Although it wasn't really an excuse, he genuinely woke up early because he hadn't slept well. "Didn't sleep well?" Benson asked with some concern. "Is your work stress high lately?" "Perhaps," Klein said. "It's a very good job, with generous weekly pay and it's easy, so I hope I can do better to be worthy of this job." Benson nodded, then, thinking of his precarious hairline, he expressed with some sadness, "The fact that you passed the interview and got this job means you're worthy of it. Unless there's something special, it's better to relax." Melissa also chimed in, "Yes, Klein, you don't need to be stressed. Our life is already very good now. Although our savings are still a bit low, that's just a matter of time." Klein smiled and nodded. The Moretti siblings finished breakfast as usual. After bidding farewell to Melissa and Benson, Klein went to Blackthorn Security Company. Rui jumped onto Eve's lap and rubbed her head against her hand. Eve rubbed Rui's small head and laughed. "It's truly the sun rising from the west." She stood up and said, "I'm going to work. Don't cause me any trouble, okay? You can take Miss Audrey out to play, but you must protect her well." "When have I ever caused you trouble, meow?" Rui's tone carried a hint of disdain. "It's clearly always been you causing me trouble." Just as she was about to speak, Eve suddenly felt a fluctuation. She looked at the wall and, sure enough, saw a cat's head with bat wings. Pooji. Little Pooji was exceptionally happy to see Eve. Its two small bat wings flapped up and down, circling Eve once. Eve stroked little Pooji, signaling it to open its mouth. Little Pooji obediently opened its mouth and took out a letter and 2 paper boxes. A cute creature immediately became terrifying. Little Pooji is a spirit world creature very suitable to be a messenger. Its mouth has a pouch for storage. Eve took the envelope and boxes. Little Pooji rubbed Eve's hand like a spoiled child. This time, there were 3 letters and 2 boxes. One letter was from Frank Lee, one was from Frank to Klein, and another was from Katlia to her. The boxes occasionally trembled, indicating that there were living creatures inside. Eve saying she knew Katlia was indeed true, but she and Katlia weren't close. She had only seen her a few times when she was little. And because of Bernadette, little Katlia would run away every time she saw her. She hadn't expected Katlia to actually write to her willingly after growing up. The girl reached out and pressed the cat's head. "Don't leave yet, wait until I finish reading the letters." Upon hearing this, little Pooji's large cat eyes immediately lit up, and it happily chirped, "Pooji, non-stop." Eve walked to the sofa, sat down, and placed the letters and boxes on the coffee table. Rui ran into the bedroom, rummaged through a drawer for a small letter opener, and carried it to Eve's hand. Eve first took Katlia's letter and opened it with the small knife. After reading it, Eve had only one comment about Katlia's letter: official. Very official language, first greeting Eve, then apologizing for writing to her so late, the reason being that she only recently learned Frank had met Eve, and finally ending with a formulaic set of pleasantries. Eve huffed twice, not disappointed, as Katlia hadn't been close to her even as a child. She placed Katlia's letter on the sofa and then opened Frank's letter. Frank's letter was much more direct and casual. He immediately said that he had followed Klein's advice and focused on yield, having already researched high-yield wheat. He hybridized wheat and fish, developing a fish that could grow wheat. The wheat produced by one fish could make many loaves of bread. As a token of gratitude, he sent 2 fish, one for Klein and one for Eve. "Your result has nothing to do with Zhou Mingrui's idea," Eve muttered to herself, besides you, who would use fish to grow wheat? Eve looked at the boxes and opened one of them. A small black fish, about as long as Eve's index finger, with tiny plant sprouts clearly visible in the gaps between its scales. As the fish grew, these sprouts would also gradually grow. Eve held the box in front of Rui Rui and asked with a smile, "Do you want to eat it?" Rui Rui didn't even sniff it, pressing a paw on the back of Eve's hand and pushing hard, refusing. "Are you sure this is edible? You clearly ate it last time. Was the last one the same as this one?" "The last one was meant to be eaten." Rui Rui rolled her eyes in a very unladylike manner. "And you guys tricked me into eating it then. Since I'd already taken a bite, I just went ahead and finished it." Eve chuckled, then turned to little Pooji and said, "Take this letter and box to Klein. You can deliver it to the same place you delivered last time, but deliver it at Backland time, 11:30. She knew the Moretti siblings would go to their rooms to sleep after 11. Klein stayed at Blackthorn Security Company for a while, and after slightly recovering from his negative state, he returned home. Upon returning home, he told Bella not to disturb him, then locked himself in his room. Klein knelt on one knee in front of the bed, one hand supporting himself on the bed, the other reaching under the bed, leaning down to pull out a cardboard box from underneath. The box contained books Klein had obtained from Eve, all of which could not be discovered by Melissa and Benson. Although Melissa and Benson would not enter his room without his permission, just in case, Klein still hid the books under the bed. Klein hugged the small box and took out Kingdom of the Dead, which he had been reading recently. This was the last one, with only a little left. Klein planned to finish it today, then go to Eve's to exchange for some third epic books. After all, his tarot club had a member from the Forsaken Land of the Gods. The title of this book was very intimidating, but it was actually a Mary Sue novel, containing many fictional families and locations. After Klein compared it with the previous few books, he speculated that many of the families and locations within should be modeled after fourth epic families and places. Klein sat at his desk, opened the book, and found where he had last stopped reading. Perhaps due to his state, Klein's reading speed was much slower than usual. Although there were only a little over 100 pages left, by the time he finished, it was already close to dusk, and Melissa had returned. Klein closed the book, put it back in the box, and re-hid them under the bed. "I'll return the books tomorrow," Klein thought to himself as he walked out of the room. "Where's Melissa?" Klein walked out of his room but didn't see Melissa, so he went into the kitchen and asked Bella with confusion. Miss Melissa went back to her room. She asked us not to disturb her. Klein felt a bit strange but obediently did not disturb Melissa. Chapter 111, Poems. Crimson gauze covered the city, and tranquility became the main theme. Klein was hunched over the table, his right hand clutching a quill pen, copying Rosal the Great's poetry collection in Ancient Elvish. The copying assignments Eve gave Klein were all about Rosal the Great, Rosal the Great's famous sayings, Rosal the Great's poetry collection, Rosal the Great's prose collection. Klein seriously suspected Old Sister was persecuting this Beander Sr. Suddenly, Klein felt his spirituality being tugged. He followed the sensation and saw a phantom figure appear on the wall of his bedroom. Poochie, Poochie. Little Poochie flapped its wings, flew out of the wall, and came before Klein. Just like last time, it took out a letter and a box from its mouth and handed them to Klein. After Klein took the envelope and cardboard box, little Poochie blinked at Klein and disappeared from the room. Klein held the small box in one hand and glanced at the name on the envelope, Frank. No one else would use Old Sister's messenger to send me a letter, Klein thought to himself. Logically, a messenger should only be able to send letters between the contractor and others, so would my reply first go to Old Sister and then reach Frank? That seems too troublesome. But neither Frank nor I have a messenger. If only I had my own messenger. Old Sister should have incantations to summon spirit world creatures. I can try it when I have time. While pondering, Klein suddenly felt the box in his hand tremble. He was slightly surprised, there was a living creature inside the box. I hope it's not fruit fish, Klein thought to himself. I wonder how old sister dealt with the remaining fruit fish. She wouldn't have fed them all to Ruarui, would she? To think positively, maybe it's seafood, since Frank is at sea. But looking at the size of this box, the quantity must be very small. With a nervous heart, Klein opened the box. Inside the box was a small black fish, about a finger long, with several milky white sprouts squeezed out from the gaps in its scales. Klein silently looked at the small fish in the box, feeling a sense of expectation. Although he didn't know what kind of fish this was, it was clearly not a normal species. Klein closed the box, found a small knife, and opened the envelope. After reading it, Klein didn't know what to say for a moment. Although it was indeed developing towards higher yields, who would normally use fish to grow wheat? Klein rubbed his temples, trying to understand Frank. There's no land on the ship, all around is sea, there are fish, and it's also possible that Frank likes fish. Klein shook his head, picked up his pen, and wrote a reply to Frank, hoping that these wheat seeds could grow in soil, not in fish meat. If he didn't have land for his research, he could try seawater. After writing the letter, Klein checked it again. After confirming it was correct, he took a silver bell from his pocket and injected his spirituality into it. This silver bell used to be Ruarui's accessory. After Eve personally made a cat tag for Ruarui, it was made into a Beander item for summoning messengers. The silver bell shook twice but made no sound. In an instant, Klein saw little Poochie again. Just like last time, after Klein threw the letter into its mouth, little Poochie disappeared. Klein glanced at the spot where little Poochie disappeared and returned to his desk to do his homework. By the time he finished his homework, it was almost midnight. Klein didn't go to bed immediately. Instead, he pulled out a cardboard box from under his bed and returned it to Eve using a sacrificial ritual. After the sacrificial and bestowal ritual succeeded, Klein had sent the cardboard box to the gray fog, but because he often had to take it out to read, it was too troublesome, and there was also the danger of Melissa and Benson discovering it, so he hid it back in its original place. Although Klein didn't want Melissa and Benson to discover these books, if they were discovered, it wouldn't be too difficult to explain. The next day, Klein stayed at Blackthorn Security Company for a while, and at noon, he quietly came to Eve's apartment in Tingen. He had already silently chanted Eve's honorific name in his heart, and when he arrived at Eve's residence, old sister was lying on the sofa waiting for him. "Yo, little brother," Eve said, propping herself up on the sofa with both hands, "you're finally here." Klein nodded. He was already used to old sister's unreliability. Eve straightened up, waved to Klein, and said, "Let's go." After speaking, she stretched, then walked towards the full-length mirror in the living room. Klein followed Eve into the mirror world. The mirror surface rippled like water, and Klein and Eve passed through the mirror to arrive in the storage room. Klein scanned the room. It was still the same as when he last came, even the broken silver mirror on the floor was the same. The only difference was that there was an extra cardboard box on the floor of the storage room, very conspicuous. It was the one he had sacrificed to Eve last night. Clearly, Eve had once again casually thrown things into the mirror world. Eve walked towards the cardboard box, picked it up with both hands, and came to the fourth epic bookshelf, placing the books one by one on the shelf. "Do you need my help?" "No." Klein withdrew his gaze and walked towards the third epic bookshelf. Kingdom of God, Confession, Lamb of the Lord. There weren't many books from the third epic. Klein picked up each one and flipped through them, finding that the books from the third epic were all heavily imbued with religious overtones. Besides a few poetry collections, there were also a few novels and essays. Klein took a few poetry collections, then turned to Eve and said, "I've got them." Klein roughly flipped through them. The first few pages of these poems were all praising the Creator, which could help him understand the history of the third epic. The creation myth of the City of Silver was vastly different from that of the northern continent. Klein had a premonition that after reading these poems, no, perhaps even before finishing them, he would know who was telling the truth and who was lying. "I've got them," Klein said. After 2 seconds of thought, I want to read here for a while, is that okay? These poems were not like those books from the fourth epic. If the third epic poems were truly vastly different from the creation myth, Melissa and Benson finding him reading these books would surely think he had joined a cult. Okay. Eve took Klein out of the mirror world. Klein, holding the books, came to the sofa, placed the books in his arms on the coffee table, pulled out one of them, and sat on the sofa, beginning to read. His serious expression was as if he were studying some academic work. Suddenly, Klein found a cup of coffee by his hand. You'll be on duty at Channy's gate tonight, won't you? Eve raised her chin, indicating, wake yourself up. Because of frequent late nights, Klein's spirit was indeed a bit low. Thank you. Klein picked up the coffee and thanked her. He blew on the coffee, took a small sip, and looked up at Eve. A question suddenly popped into his mind. Chapter 112 The Creator. If Miss Justice found the agate peacock's egg, sacrificed it to me, and then I bestowed it upon Eve, this act would be very similar to little Poochie delivering my reply to Eve, and then Eve delivering it to Frank. Could Eve really be doing that? That's too much trouble for her. I should contract my own messenger as soon as possible. Did my reply first reach your hands and then get sent to Frank? Klein asked, somewhat curious. No, Eve replied, curled up on the sofa, reading Wuthering Heights. You can think of it as me summoning a spirit world creature to help. Klein nodded, feeling that it was as he expected. In that case, the messenger matter wasn't urgent, as Klein currently didn't have such a need. He should first study the history of the third epic. The Lord awoke from chaos, and the gospel spread across the land. He said, let there be light, and there was light. The Lord's other half, the King of Angels, the King among Angels. The King of Elves defied God. The more Klein read, the graver his expression became. In this ancient text, the Creator appeared alongside Beander races like giants and dragons, and it also praised the Creator's achievements in defeating ancient gods and saving humanity. Beander races such as giants, dragons, and elves appeared in the second epic, meaning the Creator was still active in the world during the second epic. However, in the creation myth, the Creator completely integrated into the universe in the first epic, transforming into all things. His lungs evolved into elves, his heart into giants, his head into dragons. From his wisdom, humans were born, and his spirit transformed into the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. The second epic was a time when humans survived under the protection of the gods. If the records in the third epic book were true, then the creation myth was false. Klein didn't show much surprise. He hadn't really believed in the authenticity of the creation myth from the beginning. But this creator should have still fallen later. Klein sighed in his heart. He saved humanity from the Beander races, led them to power, and single-handedly created the glorious era. What a pity. Klein felt pity for the creator in his heart, turned a page, and continued to read. King of Angels. Is old sister a king of angels? The title King of Angels had appeared once before, describing the dark angel. Klein had thought its meaning was simply, king among angels, but now it seemed not, as the book did not use, king among angels, to describe Eve. In that case, king among angels, should refer to the dark angel's leadership position among angels. Which means old sister's superior. I never thought old sister used to work for the creator. That's right, after all, old sister descended into this world in the second epic, so it's normal for her to ally with the ancient sun god. It was a wise choice. What is a king of angels? Klein asked, looking up from the book. A king of angels, Eve said without lifting her head, in a narrow sense, refers to the 9 great kings of angels who followed the creator back then. In a broad sense, it refers to all angels who possess more than one sequence one characteristic or both a uniqueness and a sequence one characteristic, existing close to true gods. Klein was dumbfounded. So powerful, and so many of them. And this was just the number of kings of angels. Klein didn't believe that a creator who could have 9 kings of angels would not have sequence 2 angels. Truly worthy of being the creator. It took Klein some time to calm his emotions before he continued reading. The Lord commanded the mirror angel to nurture the fate angel and the war angel. The Lord said, "You shall revere him as a teacher." Fate angel and war angel. The fate angel and war angel among the 9 great kings of angels. Klein guessed that these 2 kings of angels should be Ouroboros and Medici, but he didn't know which one was Ouroboros and which was Medici. I remember old sister told me that Ouroboros was found by her, but in this book, it became the creator who found him. Old sister wouldn't lie to me about such things. It seems there's an element of artistic embellishment in this book, but that's normal. However, Ouroboros later followed the true creator. Klein clearly remembered that the Aurora Order believed the creator had not completely fallen, and his core part was the true creator. Could it be true? He wondered what happened to the angels who followed the creator after his fall. If the true creator truly was a remnant of the creator, then some angels, like Ouroboros, would likely continue to follow him, but certainly not all of them. Otherwise, with the creator's lavish retinue, the true creator would definitely not be faring so poorly. More of them probably established their own factions, like old sister. Klein glanced at the wall clock, saw that it was still early, and relaxed, lowering his head to continue reading. He found that the book had a very strong monotheistic color, regarding all other gods as evil gods. And from the descriptions in the book, in the third epic, the creator was the absolute and sole orthodox faith, and some angel families from the fourth epic had already appeared in the third epic. Klein suspected that the creator might be in existence above true gods, otherwise, it would be impossible for him to suppress other true gods single-handedly. The combat power between true gods couldn't differ that much. There were also descriptions like omniscient and omnipotent. What made Klein's mood complex was that the Church of the Night used to actually be a secret organization. Not just the Church of the Night, but the Church of the God of Combat and the Earth Mother Church were also secret organizations before. This indeed aligned with what Mr. Hanged Man said, but why weren't the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom Church? Moreover, this book didn't mention anything related to the Lord of Storms, the Eternal Blazing Sun, or the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. Could the Lord of Storms, the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom truly originate from the Creator, born after the Creator's fall? Klein closed the book and gently tapped his palm with its spine, again and again. Although the creation myth was false, it should contain some distorted truths and still have reference value. This could explain why the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom Church weren't secret organizations. Klein pondered, head down. They were born after the Creator had already fallen. This is a third epic book, meaning the Creator still existed in the third epic. The fourth epic, however, was the era of the 6 gods, and old sister also said that the true Creator was once an orthodox god in the fourth epic. All of this indicates that the Creator had already fallen in the fourth epic. Why did the Creator fall? The third epic and the fourth epic. The Great Calamity. Could the Great Calamity have been caused by the Creator's fall? It's highly possible, Klein mused in his heart. It involves more than a dozen gods and angels. Klein rubbed his temples, feeling a headache. He felt that a major secret must be hidden behind the Creator's fall, but this was not something a mere Sequence 8 could uncover. Although he had already uncovered many secret histories that a mere Sequence 8 shouldn't have explored. Klein put the book down, closed his eyes, and rubbed his somewhat dry eyes. 2 seconds later, he opened his eyes and looked at Eve. Eve had already finished Wuthering Heights and was now reading, Annoying Miss Mary. Do you believe in the Creator? Klein suddenly asked. Chapter 113, Literary Salon. Eve looked up slightly, recalling Michael's grand image of the past. This is hard to believe, right? After 2 seconds of deliberation, Eve shook her head and said seriously, it cannot be called a belief, but he is indeed a revered existence. Klein placed the book on the coffee table in front of him and said, it seems there's a bit too much artistic embellishment. That's normal. Eve leaned back, waved her hand, and chuckled, but there's a lot of truth to it too. Klein looked out the window. It was nearing dusk, and the sun's light was no longer dazzling, softening its rays to appear gentle, yet still dyeing the surroundings with a golden hue, as if guarding a king. The sky had already turned to a darker mode, and the distant city appeared like a silhouette, shrouded in shadow. I have to go back. Klein stood up, picked up the cane leaning against the sofa, adjusted his top hat, and said jokingly, if I don't return before nightfall, it'll be counted as an unexcused absence. All right. Eve pushed off the armrests of the sofa with both hands, and with a slight exertion, her body lifted from the soft sofa. Your Beander item is ready. I plan to pick it up tomorrow. Do you want to come? That fast? Klein thought with some surprise. Befriending an artisan is definitely more beneficial than detrimental. Without hesitation, Klein immediately nodded. Inside a luxurious villa in Backland, Viscount Glaint enthusiastically greeted her, gently taking the beautiful lady's hand and giving it a light, honorary kiss. Your beauty fills my salon with radiance. Viscount Glaint praised her as usual, then lowered his voice and whispered, those two ladies have already arrived. They are Beyonders, but they also have their own professions. One is an author, and the other is a company employee. Audrey nodded knowingly, showing a mix of anticipation and doubt, seemingly mindful of her personal maid, Anne, beside her, and trying to suppress her curiosity. An author? Audrey asked nonchalantly. Yes, you should have read her work, Wuthering Heights, the Wuthering Heights, that has been widely praised in the last 2 months. Viscount Glaint straightened up and led Audrey towards the living room. Miss Furs is like Miss Cece in Wuthering Heights, calm, intelligent, and lazy. Miss Sherman is rather shy, but she is a very powerful Beander. Sherman. Audrey was a little surprised. Aunt Elena had entrusted the Tingen City Security Company to investigate Baron Edgar's information, which was then sent to Audrey's mother. Audrey had also secretly glanced at it a few times. Miss Sherman? Audrey asked as if casually. Miss Sherman is a company employee who only recently returned to Backland, Viscount Glaint explained, then suddenly lowered his voice, looking straight ahead, and whispered, she is a very powerful Beander, extremely powerful. It's just a pity that she'll be leaving Backland this winter. She plans to go to Jiang County with her fiancé for the winter. Fiancé? Audrey appeared to be listening intently to Viscount Glaint, but in reality, she was thinking rapidly in her mind. Finally, she opened her mouth but said nothing. Viscount Glaint was about to say more when he suddenly saw two ladies who always gathered together standing by the long table, taking desserts. These are Miss Furs and Miss Sherman, Viscount Glaint introduced. Audrey looked up, observing the two ladies in front of her, and in less than a few seconds, she gleaned a lot of information. Many of Miss Furs's characteristics align with her identity as an author. Her gaze has a sense of looking down on me and Viscount Glaint. Is this the psychological advantage Beyonders have over ordinary people? Miss Sherman also has this feeling, but relatively less than Miss Furs. Is it due to her personality? Viscount Glaint said Miss Sherman is prone to shyness. Girls with such a personality are usually softer. Neither of them showed any panic or fear, which means Viscount Glaint didn't discover them, rather, they actively sought out Viscount Glaint. Why would two Beyonders actively seek out a noble? Money. Materials. While Audrey was observing Furs and Sherman, Viscount Glaint had already introduced Audrey to the two ladies. Good afternoon, Miss Furs, Miss Sherman. Audrey lifted her skirt and bowed slightly. It's a pleasure to meet you. I really enjoyed Miss Furs's Wuthering Heights, especially the calm, intelligent, and lazy Miss Cece in it. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Audrey. Furs returned the bow. Your beauty is truly astonishing. I think I already have material for my next novel. Good afternoon, Miss Audrey. Sherman returned the bow. She widened her eyes slightly as she looked at Audrey, then immediately realized this might be impolite and quickly averted her gaze. So beautiful, a woman as beautiful as my teacher, it's hard to imagine she's just an ordinary person. Sherman thought in surprise, feeling a bit envious. After advancing to demoness of pleasure, her potion digestion speed slowed down. She couldn't do anything to betray Jessica. Relying solely on Jessica to act out the demoness of pleasure was too slow, and the core of the demoness of pleasure's acting was, extreme pleasure is also pain. How could she actively harm Jessica and make him suffer? The Rose school of thought had developed many years and found some methods to avoid direct contact acting, but many of them Sherman still couldn't accept. She was a very conservative person. The remaining methods involved making others feel pain through other forms of pleasure, but this was too difficult, and the pleasure in the demoness of pleasure's acting primarily referred to that aspect of pleasure, even having corresponding abilities. So, this method was not only difficult but also slow in digestion. Therefore, Sherman felt that she probably wouldn't become a high-sequence demoness. Sherman touched her smooth and delicate face and smiled slightly. However, what she had now was already enough. A beautiful woman, and a handsome fiancé, these were things she couldn't have imagined before. Audrey had been observing Sherman, and the spectator's keen observational skills immediately made her notice the difference in Sherman's smile. It changed from a polite smile to a sincere, very happy smile. Audrey followed Sherman's gaze. It was a handsome man, looking very mature. Is that Miss Sherman's fiancé? It seems Miss Sherman and her fiancé have a very good relationship. The beautiful young woman slightly curved her lips, looking at her distant fiancé with a hint of happiness. Jessica was sitting on the sofa, chatting animatedly with a group of people. Chapter 114, Sheriff Gustav. In front of everyone, the four of them couldn't chat much, so they exchanged a few pleasantries and left. Miss Audrey entered the salon with an elegant and sweet smile on her face. Her spectator abilities and her own beauty allowed her to easily win everyone's affection. Just as Audrey felt her facial muscles ache, she finally received a hint from Viscount Greenlight. She smiled and nodded to the people around her, excusing herself to the restroom and leaving the drawing room. After confirming that the gazes following her had disappeared, Audrey detoured to the study on the first floor and said to her personal maid, "I have something to discuss with Viscount Greenlight, Annie. You stand guard at the door and don't let anyone else in." Annie nodded, not finding it strange at all. Her young mistress and Viscount Greenlight shared the same hobby and often exchanged occult knowledge in private. Audrey placed her hand on the doorknob, about to meet two true Beyonders, but Audrey didn't feel nervous. I am no longer a lady new to the Beyonder world, Audrey thought with a hint of pride in her heart. Upon entering the room, Audrey immediately locked the door and looked inside. Furs stood in front of a bookshelf, casually flipping through books, while Sherman sat at the desk. Upon seeing Audrey enter, she curved her lips slightly and smiled at her. "Let me reintroduce myself, Miss Audrey." Furs put down the book in her hand when she saw Audrey enter, walked up to her, and said with a smile, "I am an author, and also a Beyonder." "Is that so?" Audrey showed a timely expression of doubt. "It seems we need to prove it," Sherman said, not surprised. She raised her hand, and an illusory flame ignited in her palm. Audrey covered her mouth in surprise. "Oh, my, how marvelous, such a peculiar flame. This isn't a trick." Sherman flipped her palm, and the black illusory flame disappeared from her hand again. Audrey exclaimed repeatedly, then looked at Furs. Furs smiled slightly. "It seems Miss Audrey wishes for me to prove myself as well." "No," Audrey waved her hand, smiling apologetically, "I already believe you, I'm just curious about Miss Furs's abilities." Furs smiled indifferently, placing her hand on the door. Suddenly, Audrey seemed to see Miss Furs transform into a phantom and pass through the door. She blinked, coming back to her senses, and realized that Furs was indeed no longer in her original spot. A few seconds later, the doorknob turned, and Furs walked in from outside. "How truly miraculous!" Viscount Greenlight exclaimed. Audrey smiled at Furs, while mentally guessing their intentions, and said, "Thank you very much, Miss Furs." "Now let's communicate honestly," Furs said with a low laugh. "I was once a clinic doctor. Due to special reasons, I became a Beyonder, and it has been over 2 years now. Sherman became a Beyonder earlier than me. She is a truly senior and powerful Beyonder. We need you to do something. In return, we will guide you into the true Beyonder circle, where you can obtain formulas and materials for certain pathways, and become true Beyonders. What is it? Viscount Greenlight asked impatiently. We have a friend, she is upright and kind, and highly respected, but for some reason, she was imprisoned and is awaiting final judgment. I hope you can rescue her. I understand, Audrey frowned slightly, but Miss Furs, the abilities you've shown seem very suitable for this task. No, Miss Audrey, Furs shook her head, my abilities can only be used on myself, and we hope to use legal methods as much as possible. With Sherman's abilities, she could indeed rescue Zio, but it would cause them to be targeted by the authorities. Wild Beyonders being targeted by the authorities is very dangerous, they might even become wanted criminals. Neither Furs nor Sherman wanted this to happen. Furs wanted a peaceful life. Sherman also wanted a peaceful life, and Jessica didn't know about Sherman's Beyonder identity. They couldn't tell Jessica, your fiancé broke out of prison and is now a wanted criminal, hurry and run away. Jessica would definitely say with a surprised face, impossible, my Sherman would never do such a thing, nor could she. Someone must be framing her. Audrey deliberated, may I ask, what was the reason your friend was imprisoned? Furs and Sherman immediately looked a bit embarrassed, she is a very respectable lady, it's just, the method she used to persuade a certain scoundrel was a bit too aggressive. Quote. This is it. Eve stood with one hand on her hip, pointing sideways at the house in front of them and said. This artisan is quite good. You can look for him if you need any low to mid-sequence Beyonder items made in the future. Because Klein was on duty at Channy's gate, he didn't wake up until past 2 in the afternoon. By the time he could set off, it was already 4 o'clock. Klein looked at the house in front of him. It was very ordinary, with nothing particularly memorable about it. I wonder what kind of artisan he is. Klein thought curiously in his heart. To actually get old sister to help him find customers. Eve knocked on the door and, after receiving an affirmative response from inside, pushed the door open. Klein followed closely behind her. He had expected to see many tools, but there were none. It truly looked like an ordinary residence, even tidier than many bachelors' homes. The room layout was simple, with a square wooden table in the living room, which was likely where he usually ate. Further from the dining table was a 2-seater sofa, on which sat a somewhat stout man. The furniture looked ordinary, but judging by the red wine on the wooden table, the artisan's financial situation was not as common as he made it seem. After moving, Klein had gone with Benson to buy some red wine for their home, learning a bit about it. That bottle should be the famous Ormir red wine, reportedly costing over £100 per bottle. Upon seeing Eve, the man's face showed some surprise, and he immediately stood up to greet her. Miss Eve, Sheriff tried his best to act normal, but his expression always revealed a hint of fear and flattery. Are you here to pick up the Beyonder item? I'll get it right away. Sheriff hadn't expected Eve to arrive so soon. Usually, even the fastest pickups were a month after completion, and the longest had even exceeded 2 years. He secretly glanced at the bespectacled man behind Eve, suspecting the anomaly was related to him. Could this Beyonder item have been made for him? Sheriff immediately felt somewhat relieved that he had never delayed the construction period because Eve was late to pick up items, always prioritizing Eve's commissions. Otherwise, it would be awkward if he couldn't produce the goods now. This is the sailor's bracelet. Sheriff retrieved a bracelet from inside the house, saying with a hint of embarrassment. The bracelet was beautiful, strung with aquamarine gems and small white and pink seashells. Although he knew Eve might not use these Beyonder items, Sheriff, to please Eve, always made female accessories for his creations, which were both exquisite and easy to carry, and Eve had never stopped him. Klein looked at the bracelet in Sheriff's hand, trying hard to close his mouth, which wanted to complain. The persona must not collapse. Eve, on the other hand, had no reaction. The Beyonder items Sheriff made had never been for her use, so she didn't care about their appearance. This time, she did consider this point, but she still didn't speak to change it. Eve thought accessories were quite good, convenient to carry. The young girl nodded, signaling him to continue. After wearing it, an invisible layer of hard illusory scales will grow on the skin, but if worn for more than 3 hours, the body will become unusually itchy. Within 3 hours, it is harmless. Sharap explained. He wanted to rub his nose to alleviate his embarrassment, but remembering Eve was still there, he lowered his hand. Very good, Klein said expressionlessly, reaching out to take the bracelet. This is Gehrman's sparrow, Eve said. Even though he had guessed it, Sharap was still somewhat surprised. Miss Eve rarely mentioned anything other than Beander items to him. Although they had known each other for many years, their communication was pitifully scarce. Sharap didn't think this was bad, on the contrary, he thought it was excellent. Hello, Mr. Sparrow, Sharap immediately extended his hand, saying, with a hint of curiosity and envy in his eyes as he looked at Klein, and introduced himself, my name is Sharap Gustav, you can call me Sharap. Hello. Klein reached out to return the greeting, maintaining an expressionless facade, but his mind was actually in turmoil. Gustav. It couldn't be the Gustav of Rosal Gustav, could it? A descendant of Emperor Rosal. It should be. I knew that someone treated specially by old sister couldn't be ordinary. Even if he were truly ordinary, being treated specially by a king of angels would already make him very extraordinary. Klein suppressed the shock in his heart and naturally withdrew his hand. Sharap was somewhat surprised to see no shocked reaction from Gehrman. He secretly glanced at Eve, then immediately averted his gaze. Eve stepped forward 2 paces and placed her hand on Klein's shoulder. Watching the two leave, Sharap immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't want to face Eve. Although this lady had never harmed him and had always taken care of his business, Sharap only felt awe for this familiar yet strange woman who had appeared in his life when his grandfather was still alive. He guessed that the reason this woman had always looked after them was likely because of their surname, Gustav. They were descendants of Emperor Rosal, and this was their source of pride. Chapter 115, Sieur Moretti. Klein put the sailor bracelet into his pocket, not wanting to look at it. The thought of a crazy adventurer wearing such a bracelet to hunt pirates made Klein feel speechless. Is Mr. Sharap a descendant of Emperor Rosal? Klein asked, looking back. Yes, Eve nodded, he is the child of Rosal's eldest son, Shar, but I take care of him more because of Shar. Shar. Klein slightly raised his head, carefully recalling his university history knowledge, but found that he had no impression of this person. Shar is just an ordinary person, Eve smiled slightly, as if seeing through Klein's thoughts, and said, it's normal not to know. Emperor Rosal's eldest son. Klein took off his top hat and placed it on the desk, putting everything else aside. Just this identity alone is quite extraordinary, isn't it? Eve smiled slightly and said nothing. In fact, even if Sharap and his family had never told Eve, Eve could tell that they were proud of being descendants of Emperor Rosal. This is a normal view. If he really is an ordinary person, then such an identity would be a torment for him instead, Klein said thoughtfully and seriously. He leaned his cane against the desk and smiled, saying, but before caring about a prince, I need to care about my own dinner. Bella is on vacation today, and the kitchen is waiting for me all alone right now. All right, Eve said indifferently, crossing her arms, I hope Rui is also waiting for me. I think you need rest more than dinner, Klein chuckled. Sunday. Tingen Technical College has 1 day off per week, so even Melissa did not need to attend classes on Sunday. To strengthen their bond with Melissa, Eve invited Melissa to go shopping together. Eve accompanied Melissa to buy some mechanical parts, while Melissa accompanied Eve to choose supplies for Rui. As they wandered, the two unconsciously arrived at the Orr Street district. The seer club is located here. Although he no longer needed to act as a seer, Klein had always been committed to earning back his membership fees, so he would come to the seer club whenever he had free time. Eve's lips curved slightly. Although she could immediately know if Klein was inside if she wanted to, Eve did not do so. That makes it more interesting. Melissa looked up at this district, clearly noticing the seer club nestled within it. Is this the seer club that teacher Eve mentioned? Melissa cast her gaze towards the club from a distance, scanned it up and down, and then withdrew her sight. Seeing Melissa's lack of interest in the seer club, a hint of disappointment appeared in Eve's eyes. Seeing the disappointment in her teacher's eyes, the girl paused. She looked up at the seer club, then at Eve, and quietly reached into her pocket, clutching the remaining pennies in her palm. There are still 10 pennies. 10 pennies can buy 5 pounds of bread. Melissa bit her lip and hesitated, saying, "Teacher, that seer club over there is the one you introduced, isn't it? Let's go take a look together. I'll just accompany Teacher Eve inside to look, not to get a seer." Okay. Eve immediately put on a joyful expression and happily led Melissa towards the seer club. Inside the seer club's citrine room, Klein said expressionlessly to the guest in front of him, "I'm sorry, sir, that lady doesn't like you. You don't have a chance to be together." Colbert's face immediately showed a hint of disappointment, and he asked unwillingly, "Sir, could it be that the result is an error?" "Oh, I'm not questioning your ability, it's just, perhaps the information I provided was incomplete or there was an error in the information. I can repeat it." Eve, a teacher in the mechanical department of Tingen Technical College. 1.68 meters tall. "No, sir," Klein waited for him to finish before refuting, "the information you provided is very complete, and I have already used a seer to confirm the authenticity of the information. This is the result of the seer, there is no error." "Sir, is there really no error?" Colbert asked again. "I was planning to." "What are you planning to do?" "Confess." Klein thought expressionlessly. The first time he encountered such a thing, Klein couldn't keep a straight face. He only had one thought at the time, no brother-in-law. He had just accepted that his brother had become his sister, and he didn't want to suffer another critical blow so soon. But as such incidents became more frequent, Klein went from initial shock and rejection to numbness and sympathy. Klein usually only received such seers on Sundays, because students had school on weekdays, and Klein had already gone home by the time they finished school. But just this Sunday, Klein had already received 3. Watching that gentleman leave, Klein silently sighed, expressing sympathy. Colbert left the citrine room dejectedly, closing the door behind him. "Colbert." A familiar voice sounded in his ear. Colbert suddenly looked up and saw Teacher Eve standing in front of him. Teacher. Is this the guidance of fate?" "But Mr. Moretti." Ms. Angelica said that Mr. Moretti is a very magical seer. Colbert looked at Eve, and an idea suddenly popped into his mind. Perhaps that Mr. Moretti had no real ability, just a highly skilled swindler, and I should follow the guidance of fate. The blond boy drew a crimson moon on his chest with his finger, took a deep breath, and said, "Teacher Eve, I have something to tell you. Can you come with me for a moment?" "Of course," Eve said with a smile, turning to Melissa beside her and saying, "Melissa, you wait for me here first." Melissa nodded obediently, looking at the two with some unease. Would Miss Melissa like to take a look first? Ms. Angelica smiled and handed over the roster of seers, but Melissa waved her hand in refusal and sat quietly on the sofa, waiting for Eve to return. She wasn't there for a seer, she was just accompanying Teacher Eve. Eve followed Colbert into an empty room. It seemed Colbert had been here before. "Teacher Eve." Colbert's face was flushed, and he stammered, I. "You like me?" Colbert was stunned, and a look of ecstasy appeared on his face. Eve smiled and said, "I'm glad you like me, but I don't like you." The smile on his face had not yet faded, and for a moment, Colbert even forgot his sadness. His mind was just a blank. He didn't know when he walked out of the room. By the time he reacted, he had already left that room. "Colbert." Melissa saw that Colbert seemed to be in an unusual state and asked with concern. "Mr. Moretti." Colbert said blankly. "I'm sorry. Mr. Moretti." "Mr. Moretti is a famous seer here. He is not a fortune teller but a true seer," Ms. Angelica said while flipping through the list. She suddenly stopped flipping the list and pointed to a name, saying, "It's this gentleman, miss. Would you like to try?" Melissa followed Ms. Angelica's finger and saw, "Klein Moretti, 8 pennies, written clearly on it." Chapter 116, My Seer Brother. Klein wrapped the citrine around his hand, put his top hat back on, and thought with some annoyance, perhaps I could put a note on the wall that says, "Don't love Eve, it's fruitless." He imagined the scene, a group of people gathered around, discussing the content of the note. If that happened, Eve's reputation would probably spread from Tingen Technical College to all of Tingen. As for what kind of reputation it would be, that remained to be seen. Lost in thought, Klein stood up and walked out of the citrine room, preparing to pour himself a cup of coffee. Tap, tap, tap. His cane tapped the ground repeatedly as Klein moved, one tap after another, but then suddenly, it stopped. A familiar voice unexpectedly entered Klein's ears. "Mr. Moretti. Oh my God. Melissa." Klein quickly identified the owner of the voice. He lifted his cane to prevent it from making noise and quietly approached the reception desk. It really was Melissa. Klein's mind immediately went blank. All thoughts vanished from his head, and his body acted before his brain, fleeing directly back to the citrine room and locking the door. "Klein." Melissa stared dumbfounded at the name on the paper, momentarily doubting her own eyes. Klein can actually perform divination. Could it be that his teacher taught him? "Ms. Angelica," Melissa tugged at her dress uncomfortably, "is Klein a member of the Seer Club?" "Does the young lady know Mr. Klein?" Angelica asked casually, not surprised. Klein was considered a relatively famous seer. "Yes," Melissa nodded, her lips pressed together. After deliberating for 2 seconds, she said, "He is my brother." Angelica looked at Melissa in surprise, her eyes revealing a hint of astonishment. "I never would have thought. Oh, wait, do you need me to help you find Mr. Klein?" "Mr. Klein was just helping someone with a divination, he's finished now." "No, not now," Melissa immediately said. The young girl looked left and right, then asked uncomfortably, "I want to ask how to join the Seer Club. Is there a membership fee?" Angelica nodded and said, "Does Miss Moretti want to join the club? You can join the Seer Club simply by paying the membership fee. The initial membership fee is 5 soer, and 1 soer annually thereafter. Members can use the club's meeting rooms and various divination rooms and tools for free, enjoy our complimentary coffee and tea, read our subscribed newspapers and magazines for free, and purchase lunch, dinner, alcoholic beverages, and some divination textbooks and materials at cost price. Furthermore, we invite at least one famous seer to give lectures and answer difficult questions every month." This might not be very useful for Miss Moretti, as you have a true seer for a brother. Most importantly, your brother is also here, and you can find a group of friends with similar interests to exchange experiences with. 5 soer. Melissa was shocked by the expensive fee. This was almost Klein's weekly salary. Too extravagant. "No, I have no intention of joining the club," Melissa said firmly. "I am not interested in divination." "That's truly surprising." Angelica's mouth widened slightly. "After all, your brother is a true seer." "I thought his family would also. Your brother is truly amazing. Even people not interested in divination find it hard to completely lose interest after encountering Mr. Klein. Klein's divination abilities seem very strong. Ms. Angelica keeps saying Klein is a true seer." Melissa lowered her head, looked at Klein Moretti, 8 pence, on the paper, remained silent for a few seconds, then said, "Ms. Angelica, how are your prices determined?" Angelica followed Melissa's gaze, saw Klein Moretti, 8 pence, on the paper, chuckled softly, and explained, "Our prices are set by the seer themselves. We take 1/8 of the total price. Actually, with Mr. Klein's skill, he could easily charge 1 soer, or even 2 soer, but you cannot insult a true seer with money." Melissa's eyes were filled with shock and confusion. Cannot insult a true seer with money, what does that mean? An industry taboo. But when did Klein become a seer? Benson and I had no idea. We didn't even know when he became interested in divination or when he joined the Seer Club. "When did Klein join the club?" Melissa asked, her expression serious and inquisitive, as she looked up at Angelica. "Mr. Klein seems to be hiding something from his family." Angelica hesitated, deliberated for a few seconds, and finally said tentatively, "Mr. Klein hasn't been a member for long. She observed Melissa's expression, which was still the same as before. It seems, she didn't say anything wrong, Angelica continued. He joined in early July. Early July. At that time, Klein hadn't been promoted yet, and only had a weekly salary of 3 soer. Where did his 5 soer membership fee come from? This Mr. Moretti is truly a seer of noble character, Eve said, resting her chin on her clenched fist in thoughtful contemplation. Few people can refuse money. Teacher Eve. Melissa was stunned. She hadn't noticed when Teacher Eve had returned. But then, thinking of Eve's strange presence, it seemed perfectly reasonable. The young girl felt her face flush at Eve's praise. She shyly averted her gaze and changed the subject, saying, "Did Colbert need something from you, teacher?" Others might not know, but she did. Klein must have set such a low price due to some unavoidable reason. "Nothing," Eve said with a smile. "I lost a pen, and Colbert happened to find it." Eve had encountered such things countless times over the millennia, from both men and women, attracted by the beauty and charm of a high-ranking demoness. She had long grown accustomed to it and didn't care. Many suitors claimed their love was passionate and profound, but most ended up marrying, having children, and living normal lives. Melissa nodded, saying nothing. She looked at the list, then at Eve, biting her lower lip nervously, feeling hesitant and awkward for a moment. "I wonder when Teacher Eve arrived. Did she hear that Klein is my brother?" "Let's choose this seer," Eve said, pointing to Klein Moretti, 8 pence, on the list. "The price is very reasonable, and he's capable." Melissa's eyes showed a hint of embarrassment. She really wanted to rush in and drag Klein out to question him. But she couldn't. There were so many people here, and her teacher and Klein's colleagues were all present. Both Klein and she needed to maintain their dignity. "Teacher Eve, you go," Melissa said, tilting her head slightly and staring at the wooden table in front of Ms. Angelica. "I'll wait for you here. I hope Klein can give me a convincing reason when we get home." Chapter 117. Meander Revelation. "Miss Eve, please wait here for a short while. It will only take a little time." Angelica stepped out from behind the desk and explained, "Mr. Klein was just helping a gentleman with a divination, the one who just left. He should be in the lounge or another room now. I'll go look for him." After speaking, Angelica smiled slightly at the 2 ladies and hurried away. Walking through the long corridor, a familiar figure suddenly came into view. "Mr. Klein." Klein subtly glanced behind Angelica, quietly letting out a sigh of relief. On the surface, he adopted his usual charlatan demeanor and asked Angelica with a smile, "Ms. Angelica, which young lady wishes for a divination?" Angelica's face showed a hint of surprise, but then she remembered that Mr. Klein was a truly mystical seer. She nodded. "It's Miss Eve." Ah. She didn't know how much Mr. Klein knew, or if he was aware of the 2 ladies outside. After 2 seconds of thought, Angelica dutifully introduced them. "There are 2 ladies outside. The one who wants a divination is Miss Eve. The other is Mr. Klein's sister. Miss Eve is Miss Melissa's teacher." Klein nodded and said to Angelica, "Could I trouble Ms. Angelica to lead Miss Eve to the citrine room?" Angelica nodded, turned, and returned to the reception hall. She said to Eve, "Miss Eve, Mr. Klein is in the citrine room. I'll lead you there." Eve turned to Melissa and said, "Wait for me a moment," then stood up, nodded to Angelica, and followed the beautiful lady through the corridor to the citrine room. "Mr. Klein." Angelica knocked on the door, then opened it and stepped aside, clearing the path for entry. Inside the room, Klein sat at the wooden table, a citrine pendulum wrapped around his left hand, a faint smile on his face. Various divination tools were laid out on the tabletop, silently creating an air of mystery. Eve tilted her head, looked into the room, and immediately felt like laughing. She suppressed the corners of her mouth and walked into the room with a dignified posture. Once Eve entered the room, Angelica closed the door behind her. After Ms. Angelica left, Klein immediately dropped his mysterious demeanor and quickly stood up, hurrying towards Eve. "What are you doing?" Klein asked, his tone laced with a hint of gritted teeth. "Don't be angry yet, let me explain." Eve said unhurriedly, "Do you remember me telling you that Melissa would become a Meander in the future?" I remember, Klein said, clearly in a bad mood. Are you still dwelling on that? You can't say that. Eve walked around Klein, went to the desk, and sat down in the chair. Let me put it this way. In the future, Beander will be semi-public, or even fully public. The reason is inconvenient to say, you just need to know that this will happen. In the future, Beander incidents will significantly increase. It will be safer for Melissa and Benson to know some Beander knowledge, or even become Beanders. And through you, it's the safest way to expose Melissa to Beander, and to official Beanders at that. At this point, Eve curved her lips, a hint of slyness in her smile. Melissa is already suspicious of your income. She might ask to visit your company then. I've only taken the first step. Whether or not to continue down this path is up to you. Beander revelation. Klein's pupils contracted. This information was too shocking, leaving him somewhat unable to react. He was stunned for a few seconds, his eyes gradually regaining focus, his mind beginning to process the sudden information. After a long while, Klein's lips parted, and he spoke. So, you specifically brought Melissa here? Not really, I just happened to come here while shopping, and then this idea came to me, Eve said, crossing her arms. All right, I admit I had the thought of watching the show. The overwhelmingly significant news completely extinguished Klein's desire to retort. He didn't dwell on the loopholes in Eve's defense, nor did he consider the storm he would face when he returned home. The young man with brown eyes lowered his head in silence. After a long time, he finally looked up at Eve, his lips moving a few times before he said, "Thank you for your." Klein paused, pursed his lips, and then uttered the remaining words, concern for Melissa and Benson. He had long ago realized that Eve's attitude towards Melissa and Benson couldn't be called concern. It was more like a kind of care based on responsibility and Zhou Mingrui. Otherwise, Eve would have plotted to expose them to Beander from the very beginning, just as she had told him he would become an angel from the start, even when he was still at Sequence 9. Klein guessed that Eve's desire to watch the show probably occupied a significant position among the reasons for this matter, but if there wasn't the benefit of safely exposing Melissa to Beander, she probably wouldn't have acted, as he was genuinely angry at first. But this is already enough now. The future will slowly get better. It will get better. Klein pondered in his heart, silently cheering himself on. Since Beander will be public in the future, there's no point in hiding it now anyway. Klein turned and walked back to the desk, reseating himself in the chair. Actually, you don't need to worry so much. Eve tapped the table a few times with her fingers, drawing Klein's attention. It's just low-sequence Beander potion. Given Melissa and Benson's ages, as long as they don't drink the Beander potion while in a severely negative state, they won't lose control. All right, now, perform a divination for me. Klein was startled. Do you really want a divination? Of course, Eve said as if it were obvious, I paid 8 pence. No, you haven't paid yet, Klein corrected expressionlessly. At the Seer Club, divinations were paid for after the service. He stroked the citrine pendulum wrapped around his left hand and said, besides, if I do a divination for you, what if the pendulum breaks? That's worth more than 8 pence. And if I see something I shouldn't, and my eyes break, that's an even greater loss. Eve, tisk, Ed, I wouldn't harm you, so how could those things happen? Klein scanned Eve up and down. You appearing here with Melissa right now is harming me. The benefits outweigh the drawbacks, don't they? Eve waved her hand and laughed. How can you call that harm? A hint of disdain appeared in Klein's eyes, and he asked resignedly, what do you want to divine? What method of divination do you choose? Eve tilted her head slightly, thought for a moment, and asked, what did you divine today? Hearing this, Klein paused, looked up at Eve, his eyes filled with a complex expression. Chapter 118, Divination Content. Eve's sea-blue eyes flitted up and down, a hint of a smile gracing her face. She had already guessed what Klein was divining. She leaned forward and patted Klein's shoulder, resting her hand on his shoulder, and reassuring him with amusement. Don't worry, in 3,000 years, I've lost count of how many times I've encountered such things. There have been both men and women, I'm used to it. Men, and women. Klein's eyes widened instantly. He just said it out of habit, didn't he? He slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping over Eve's face, and fell silent. A few seconds later, Klein grasped Eve's wrist and slowly but firmly pushed her back, saying with a hint of disdain, "You could be their ancestor, yet you still flirt with them." Eve took the opportunity to sit back in her chair, raising her hands and crying out that she had been wronged. Klein feigned deafness, ignoring Eve's wails. He rubbed the citrine pendulum and said, "Hurry up and divine. Melissa is still waiting for you outside." Eve withdrew her hand, sat up straight, and rested her hands on the table, asking, "What do you want to divine?" "That's my line," Klein retorted. He looked up at Eve, then averted his gaze. Eve was indeed beautiful. The first time he saw her, he was somewhat entranced. However, the facts that Eve used to be a man, Eve used to be his brother, and Eve is now his old sister, any one of these 3 points would be enough to make Klein lose any special feelings, let alone all 3 simultaneously. He unfastened the citrine pendulum from his left hand, held it by the silver chain, and suspended it in the air. Waiting for the pendulum to still, he sighed and said, "With my level, I probably can't divine for you." Usually, the client chooses the method of divination, but she just wanted to play around and wasn't interested in how Klein divined, as long as he was the one doing it. Klein guessed that if his old sister wanted him to divine, she would likely pose simple questions that could be answered with a pendulum. Eve chuckled, leaned forward, reached out, and pinched the pendulum in Klein's hand. With a slight pull, she took it from Klein's grasp. The recently stilled citrine pendulum began to sway again. Eve held the pendulum up to Klein's eyes. Klein was momentarily stunned. His gaze shifted slightly, swept over Eve, then returned to focus on the citrine pendulum. The swaying pendulum immediately paused, then began to rotate slowly clockwise. Eve lifted her hand, and the yellow crystal was pulled up by the silver chain, tracing an arc before falling into her palm. The young woman smiled faintly and tossed the pendulum to Klein. Klein immediately extended both hands and caught the pendulum steadily. "Divine for me," Eve said, leaning back against the chair, smiling. "What did I divine? The method is up to you." A look of surprise appeared in Klein's eyes. He wrapped the citrine pendulum around his left hand, a hint of confusion in his expression, but he still seriously considered which divination method to use. "Dream divination is the most suitable," Klein mused inwardly. He pulled out a white piece of paper and wrote, "Content of Eve's divination," on it. After checking it, he crumpled it in his hand. "Do I need to leave?" Eve asked, pointing to the door. Klein shook his head, half reclined in the chair, and quickly entered a state of sleep through meditation. In a daze, Klein saw a table laden with delicacies in an unfamiliar room: cheesesteak, stewed lamb with tender peas, beef stew with potatoes. The scene lasted only an instant. Klein woke from his dream, rubbed his temples, and said with some hesitation, dinner." Eve let out a burst of laughter. She said nothing, taking 8 pence from her purse and handing it to Klein. "No," Klein waved his hand, refusing. "I must have divined incorrectly." From Eve's reaction, he knew his divination result was far from the truth, and he felt too embarrassed to accept the money. Even for an incorrect divination result, payment is due, isn't it? Eve said with a playful tone, hinting at something. Klein immediately understood. Eve was likely referring to his request for Grassis to divine. At that time, he had asked Mr. Grassis to divine whether the Antigonus family's notebook had been picked up by anyone. Mr. Grassis's result was no, but in reality, it had already been taken by Riel Bieber. "And what you said isn't wrong," Eve said with a smile. 8 pence, and only 8 pence. This is respect for divination. Klein's face showed some embarrassment, and he was instantly too awkward to speak. "I'm leaving now. You should think carefully about how to explain yourself to Melissa." Eve stood up and unhurriedly walked out of the room. Klein thought of the storm he would face when he got home and immediately felt a headache. Tonight, Klein returned home later than usual, but he still made it back before Benson. After opening the door, the only one to greet him was Melissa, sitting on the sofa with a troubled expression. Melissa had given Bella the day off specifically, waiting for Klein alone at home. Melissa, I'm home. Klein tried his best to imitate his usual tone, feigning ignorance. Klein, Melissa immediately stood up from the sofa upon hearing Klein's voice, saying with a serious expression, I have something to discuss with you. Klein appropriately showed some confusion and surprise, nodding and saying, okay. Klein, Melissa took a deep breath and walked in front of Klein. I went to the seer club in the Orr Street district today, and the receptionist there said you are a true seer. Klein, although I don't know when you developed a liking for divination, as a hobby, a reasonable hobby, even though it's surprising that you are a true seer, I will still support you. But Klein, you must explain to me. Melissa's expression grew more serious, her hands clutching her skirt as she asked, your membership fee, £5, how did you get that income? Also, Klein, does any company really give a history consultant who just started a few weeks a promotion and raise? And does the profession of history consultant really require learning combat techniques? Klein's face showed some surprise, as if he hadn't expected Melissa to ask such questions. He said somewhat flustered, Melissa, all my income is legitimate. Of course I know that, Melissa said with a serious expression. I'm worried that company is deceiving you. As expected, Klein's expression softened slightly, but in his heart, he was calculating how to deepen the misunderstanding. He needed to make Melissa suspicious so she would continue to explore, eventually uncovering the Beander world. Chapter 119, In a Bad Mood. While these things do sound a bit incredible, the truth is often magical, Melissa, Klein explained earnestly, though his eyes darted around, that security company works with the government, it's definitely a legitimate company. Besides collecting and preserving ancient artifacts, it also takes on commissions. Some of these are private, but more are official commissions. Those who complete them get a certain percentage, and those £5 came from a commission. Melissa frowned, looking at Klein. She always felt he was hiding something from them. I want to see your workplace. Can I? No. Melissa asked with a frown. I'm not going as a family member. Doesn't that security company also take private commissions? I'll go as a client. You don't have any commissions, do you? And this would be a considerable unnecessary expense. Under Melissa's gaze, Klein's voice grew softer and softer, until he finally fell silent. I'll control the expenses, Melissa said, then, as if realizing something, a hint of distress appeared on her face. Speaking of unnecessary expenses, Klein, you spent a full £5. Klein immediately fell silent and agreed. It's just too late now, you don't have time with school normally either. Let's go next Sunday. Melissa pursed her lips, her gaze fixed intently on her brother. Klein seemed a bit uncomfortable under her stare and actively shifted his gaze, staring intently at the sofa behind Melissa, as if there was something unusual about it. After a long while, Melissa opened her mouth and asked, Klein, are you hiding something from us? Klein's body stiffened for a moment, unsure how to answer. This was the result of his guidance, he knew exactly what Melissa was referring to. Seeing Klein's reaction, Melissa knew she had guessed correctly. She softened her voice and gently advised, Klein, we are family. You don't need to hide things from us. No matter what it is, we will face it with you. No, Melissa, you don't know. A wave of helplessness and sadness welled up in Klein's heart. He looked up, slowly moving his gaze like rusty machinery. The girl's brown skirt appeared in his vision. Due to long-term washing, the long skirt had faded a bit, and whitish marks could be seen on the fabric. Although Klein now had a considerable income and could buy Melissa many beautiful and fashionable dresses, Melissa always couldn't bear to, always wearing her old clothes. Klein's gaze paused after touching the hem of the skirt. He lowered his head, then moved his sight away, resuming his stare at the sofa, silently conveying his reply. Melissa frowned deeply. She wasn't angry, but she felt a sense of bitterness in her heart, as if something was blocking it. All right, Klein, since you don't want to say, I won't keep asking, Melissa said, suppressing the vexed feeling in her heart. You're very strange today. Is it because of what you're hiding? Without waiting for Klein to answer, Melissa whispered again, "Take me to see your company next Sunday. Now, we need to get dinner ready before Benson comes home." With that, Melissa walked past Klein and headed to the kitchen. Klein turned around, looked at the girl's back, silently put down his cane and top hat, took off his coat and hung it on the sofa, then followed her into the kitchen. Benson was the last of the Moretti siblings to return home. When he arrived, he saw mouth-watering food on the table and his siblings sitting at the table with an awkward atmosphere. Hearing the door open, Melissa and Klein simultaneously looked up at their brother at the door, smiled, then lowered their heads again. Benson's heart skipped a beat, feeling that the house was truly strange. Ahem, Benson cleared his throat twice, took off his coat, and asked, "Where's Bella?" Normally, the maid would appear at the door as soon as the master entered, to take the master's coat. "Bella is off today," Melissa replied. Benson vaguely felt that Melissa's tone seemed off. Melissa and Klein had a fight. An incredible thought suddenly popped into Benson's mind. Due to family reasons, even though Benson worked desperately to ensure his siblings didn't have to worry about the family, Klein and Melissa had always been precocious since childhood and had never argued. As soon as this thought appeared, Benson pondered for 2 seconds and felt it was increasingly possible, immediately finding it both amusing and heartwarming, pleased by the change in Klein and Melissa. Benson put away his coat, adopting the stance of an older brother, cleared his throat twice, and asked, "What's wrong with you two?" "Nothing," Klein and Melissa replied in unison. Benson smiled, like a kind father. "I'm not a baboon, you two don't look like, nothing is wrong." Klein and Melissa did not answer. All right, Benson said, rubbing his forehead with a wry smile. "It seems I need to add some parenting books to my reading list. It's not too late to learn now, after all, you two just learned how to argue." "We didn't argue," Klein said, sitting up straight and replying in a muffled voice. "I won't argue with Melissa." Melissa nodded. They hadn't actually argued, they were just in a bad mood. "There's nothing wrong with arguing," Benson said, sitting down in a chair and speaking to his two siblings. Emperor Rosal once said that fighting is a manifestation of closeness, and arguing is a manifestation of deep love. "We really didn't argue," Melissa shook her head. "Just some things happened that put us in a very bad mood." "Is that so?" Benson said, disappointed yet relieved. He looked at his downcast siblings and suddenly said, "Let's go on a trip during the New Year holiday. Traveling can make people happy." Klein was startled, then silently lowered his head. "We're just in a bad mood," Melissa said with a frown. "We'll be fine tomorrow. There's no need to travel, and it's still several months until New Year. Wouldn't a trip be nice?" "We really do need a trip." Benson recalled the contents of a magazine, a hint of longing in his eyes. Jiang County is warm even in the cold winter, Bansi Harbor is called the Weather Museum, and there are many, many other places worth traveling to, Melissa. "We can't spend our whole lives in Tingen. Before, we didn't have the means, but now we do. I want to take you and Klein to see many, many places. For our first trip, let's go to Jiang County." Klein felt his eyes sting. He tightly closed them, took a few deep breaths, and used his clown ability to mask any abnormality. "But Benson," Klein spoke up, "you need to prepare for the future government employee recruitment exam, and the exam is around the New Year." Benson paused, then said with some difficulty, "Is that so? Then it can only be next year. What do you two think?" Melissa secretly gripped the hem of her skirt under the table, her expression showing both longing and hesitation. If they traveled, the expenses would probably be very high. Benson immediately saw Melissa's hesitation and said, "Melissa, this is a normal middle-class life. If you don't have travel experience, people will laugh at you." After speaking, Benson glanced at Klein, hoping he would cooperate as he usually did. Klein received Benson's message. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his lips moving but nothing coming out. Benson, who hadn't received help, looked up, giving Klein a strange look. "Yes," Klein said, pursing his lips after seeing Benson's gaze. "And we can keep the expenses within an affordable range. Klein and Benson cooperated tacitly, just as they usually did, and convinced Melissa. "It's settled then," Benson said, raising his beer as if in celebration. "We'll travel during the New Year holiday next year." Chapter 120, Another Member. "Mr. Fool, you don't look so good," Eve said, leaning against the long table, her right hand propping up her face. Klein reluctantly looked up, not in the mood to dwell on Eve's address, and slumped dejectedly in the bronze chair. He felt like a student before a final exam, both scared and anticipating, both hoping the day would come quickly and hoping it would come slowly, conflicted and helpless, feeling ants crawling in his heart every minute and second, counting down in agony. "Actually, it's not a bad thing. At least you have another favorable time node, don't you?" Eve said, clasping her hands and propping up her chin. Time node. This was the excuse Klein had used to persuade himself earlier. Klein turned his head to look at Eve. He hadn't told Eve his specific thoughts back then, nor had he told her what happened last night, but she seemed to know everything. "You really didn't use divination." Klein turned his head back to look at the endless dome, the dim red stars swirling in the gray fog. "I observed it last night," Eve replied. "What exactly did you divine yesterday?" "Guess." Hearing this, Klein turned to look at Eve, silent for a few seconds, and finally said nothing. He felt that the content of Eve's divination should not be as simple as just dinner, but Klein was not someone who liked to get to the bottom of things. This truth currently held no appeal for him. Klein silently took out his pocket watch, opened the cover, calculated the time in his mind, and pulled Derek into Saphira Castle. Derek appeared in his seat looking somewhat constrained, sitting upright in the bronze chair. Subsequently, 2 red lights surged out, and Justice and Hanged Man also arrived above Saphira Castle. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Audrey's cheerful voice echoed in the ancient palace. The young girl looked up and immediately saw the figure next to Hanged Man. A new member. Audrey and Alger immediately noticed Derek's presence. "This is Sun," Eve introduced. Alger's brow furrowed slightly, then instantly relaxed, as if nothing had happened. "Did Empress know the new member? Or was Empress also present when the new member joined?" If it was the latter, it meant that after the Tarot Club ended, Fool would keep Empress alone. "This is great, we've grown another step, Mr. Fool is truly amazing," Audrey thought optimistically. After introducing Derek, Eve dutifully introduced Alger and Audrey to Derek. "What language is this?" Derek wondered. It was a language he had never heard before, but he could understand it. "Is it because of Mr. Fool?" As soon as this thought emerged, it quickly took over Derek's mind. He humbly lowered his head, becoming even more respectful. "Mr. Fool, I found another page of Rosal's diary," Audrey said happily. "I will imagine the content right away." Rosal's diary. Derek repeated with some confusion. This was something completely unfamiliar to him. What language is this?" As soon as Derek spoke, Audrey immediately noticed the anomaly. Although she hadn't encountered it before, she could understand it. Audrey quietly looked up at Fool, marveling at Mr. Fool's power and wisdom in her heart. "This seems to be giant language. Are there still people who speak giant language now?" Alger thought with a frown. He didn't find it surprising that Fool knew giant language and allowed them to understand it as well. A godlike existence was powerful and wise. "Well, perhaps with a different name, you'll be familiar with it," Audrey said, Emperor Rosal's notes. "I'm sorry," Derek said, bewildered. "I don't know." Audrey was surprised for a moment, then said incredulously, "Do you know Emperor Rosal?" Derek still shook his head. "Is he a very famous person?" "But the history books of Silver City don't mention him." "Silver City? I've never heard of that place. Where is it?" Audrey asked tentatively. Like Derek, Silver City was an unfamiliar term to Audrey. Alger remained silent but listened carefully to their conversation. "Aren't you people from Silver City?" Derek asked in return, seeing people from outside the city of Silver for the first time. "Which city-state are you from? Where is it located?" Audrey froze for a moment, her lips moving but saying nothing. Justice and Hanged Man, unaware of Sun's origin, misunderstood his meaning. Derek immediately realized that this was a gathering where members' identities were hidden, and they couldn't possibly tell him the answer. Although somewhat disappointed, Derek chose to respect the rules here and cherish this opportunity. "I'm sorry," Audrey said with a hint of apology. "I didn't mean to inquire about your address, I was just curious for a moment." Derek shook his head, indicating that he didn't mind. Audrey then breathed a sigh of relief, stopped the previous topic, and began to concentrate on recalling the contents of Rosal's diary, replicating them onto paper. Klein waved his hand, and Rosal's diary came into his grasp. Although it was only one page, Klein was very content. December 20th, a new year is about to begin, but the feedback I've been receiving has left me very confused and troubled. This world actually can't find oil. It actually can't find oil. No oil. Or hasn't it been found for some reason? Klein's pupils contracted as he pondered in confusion. If there was no oil, the industrial development of this world might take a different path. This shattered some of Klein's beautiful fantasies. Fortunately, this world still has electricity and magnetism, and I can primarily invest in these areas in the future. Klein continued reading while looking for solutions in his mind. December 21st Street. December 22nd, the environment in the old district of Lishay is unacceptably filthy. Rubber trees. December 23rd, perhaps I should consider that suggestion, to leave myself a backup plan outside the artisan church, for example, to join that ancient, secret organization that secretly influences world affairs. An ancient, secret organization that secretly influences world affairs. Sounds very powerful. Klein continued to read, hoping to learn the name of that organization. December 24th, oh my god. I can't accept it. Eve was actually male before. He was male. Male. Is this reasonable? Is this reasonable? Damn it. Such a beautiful face. No, hold it in. My persona cannot break. Klein suppressed the corners of his mouth, his clown ability allowing him to easily control his expression. Rosal initiated a patriotic health campaign. At this point, Rosal and Eve had known each other for a long time, so Emperor Rosal didn't know about this before. But that's normal, no one would casually tell others about their gender change. It's hard for the Emperor to accept, it's pretty hard for me to accept too, but for completely different reasons than Emperor Rosal. Old sister was my older brother in my previous life, and Emperor Rosal, wait. A preposterous thought suddenly appeared in Klein's mind. Emperor Rosal wouldn't like old sister, would he? Klein's pupils constricted as he subtly glanced in Eve's direction. The gray fog obscured her beautiful face, but from her figure, it was still clear that she was an exceptionally beautiful young lady. Klein immediately thought of Emperor Rosal's romantic escapades. No, Klein, Zhou Mingrui, calm down. First, they're impossible. Second, they're impossible. Finally, they're impossible. Even if Rosal truly had some thoughts, he was probably just coveting old sister's beauty. Ha! Klein fiercely spat at Rosal in his heart. He continued reading, wanting to see what this guy was really up to. December 26th, I've decided to ask for clarification. I still can't accept that my first crush in another world used to be a man. First crush. Klein stared intently at those words, reading them over and over many times, finally confirming that he had indeed not misread them. I knew it. How could this stallion-like male lead be indifferent to such a beautiful woman? A surge of anger rose in Klein's heart. At that moment, he suddenly understood the feelings of brothers who were extremely displeased with their sisters' boyfriends, even though Eve was not his sister, and Rosal was not Eve's boyfriend. December 27th, I didn't dare to go. December 28th, I still didn't dare to go. Damn it, tomorrow I must go find Eve and ask for clarification. December 29th, I still didn't dare to go, but Eve came to find me herself. It turns out she has been female ever since she transmigrated, being male was something from her previous life. It doesn't feel so hard to accept anymore. Now I can secretly admire beautiful women with a clear conscience. Speaking of which, Eve was already a sequence 3 when she descended into this world. I jokingly said that she was the true protagonist, but Eve seriously and solemnly refuted me. She said that there was a true protagonist in that era, and in front of the sun, all other light was merely fireflies. The true protagonist Eve mentioned should be referring to the ancient sun god. Klein flipped the paper to the back and continued reading. It's rare to see her serious for once. I curiously asked her who that protagonist was, but Eve fell silent. She didn't tell me, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. No matter who it is, the protagonist of this era will only be me, Rosal Gustav. I asked her again how the original owner of her body died, as a sequence 3 is very difficult to kill. Eve told me it was because of the ancient god Flegre. That's a very impressive way to die, much stronger than the original owner of my body. By the way, why am I comparing ways to die? In my own and a fellow countryman's ways to die, how strange. But if there really comes a day when I die, I hope to have a glorious death. Bah, I won't die. Why am I saying such unlucky things? Flegre. The Flegre of Hornassus Flegre. Klein's nerves immediately tensed up, and even his anger dissipated a bit. This was the first time he had encountered Flegre outside of a dream. He continued reading, hoping to get more clues. I wanted to inquire more about the ancient gods, but Eve told me that some ancient gods still exist today and are not suitable for discussion. As for the ancient gods who have already fallen, she was willing to tell me about them. It's truly astonishing that ancient gods still exist to this day. Eve told me that ancient gods are all chaotic and mad. They often possess more than one pathway, but the fused pathways are not adjacent ones. For example, the Giant King was the complete true god of the Twilight pathway, the Twilight Giant, and also possessed characteristics of the Mother pathway. The ancient gods believed that gathering similar authorities could strengthen their own authority. The ancient gods once formed two major alliances to fight against each other, but eventually, due to internal conflicts, both alliances successively disbanded. I wanted to keep listening. Why did the alliances disband? Why did the ancient gods fall? But Eve didn't continue. She said that the rest involved some very secret history, which might overturn my understanding. Tisk, I hate people who tell half a story the most. I've already transmigrated, what else could overturn my understanding? The diary ended there, and Klein's heart immediately felt heavy. Although there was a lot of information on this page of the diary, some crucial information was not revealed. There was no follow-up on the organization Emperor Rosal joined. The information Eve didn't reveal should be what I analyzed from the poems and Son's words. It seems Emperor Rosal didn't look through Eve's bookshelf, otherwise, he could have easily obtained that information. Eve wouldn't hide anything if Rosal knew. Eve would not actively tell them about this dangerous and secret history, but she would not hinder their exploration either. Klein silently suppressed the emotions in his heart and said, "You can communicate now." Audrey, in her spectator state, smiled faintly and said, "Miss, Empress, Mr. Hanged Man, I have found your materials. After the gathering, I will send the materials to you through sacrifice." After speaking, Audrey turned her head again and respectfully said to the fool, "Mr. Fool, I will immediately attempt the sacrificial ritual after leaving the gathering." Klein nodded and said, "N." His calm reaction seemed to indicate that he wasn't very concerned about this matter, but it perfectly matched Audrey's and Alger's imagination of a deity. "Also, I would like to ask 2 questions." Audrey looked at the Empress. The Empress had once said she would pay with knowledge or materials. Is there a potion name, Arbiter, and what kind of Beander can pass through a wooden door, rendering a lock ineffective? There is indeed a similar potion name. The initial sequence of the pathway controlled by the Loan royal family and the Fasak royal family is called Arbiter. However, in ancient times, the initial potion formula was sometimes granted to some nobles as a reward. Eve immediately received the signal from Miss Justice and said with a smile, "The Beander who can pass through wooden doors and ignore locks is a Beander of the apprentice pathway." The apprentice pathway's formula is mainly held by the Abraham family. Chapter 122, The Abraham Family. The Abraham family. Audrey found the name somewhat familiar. She tilted her head slightly, searching her memory for it. Alger recalled the family before Audrey did. He straightened up and tentatively asked, "The Abraham family of the fourth epoch." It was no secret among Beyonders that nobles knew and possessed Beyonder potion formulas, but few knew which pathways formulas specific nobles held, especially for nobles from the fourth epoch, a period with severe historical gaps. The hanged man became even more certain of his previous speculation: the fool might have been active in the fourth epoch. The Abraham family of the fourth epoch. Audrey hadn't expected to encounter a Beyonder from such an ancient family. Her mouth gaped slightly in surprise, then immediately closed. Her beautiful green eyes darted around, silently praying that no one had noticed her. All she saw was a thick gray fog, and the gathering members, completely obscured by it. Audrey breathed a sigh of relief, straightened her back, and asked with feigned composure, "Miss Empress, can my remaining remuneration be used to pay for information about the Abraham family?" Eve clasped her hands under her chin, saying casually, "That depends on how much information you want. Very specific details would certainly not be enough, but if you only want a general understanding, it is sufficient." A glint flashed in Alger's eyes as he secretly analyzed the information in the Empress's words. It seems the Empress possesses very rich knowledge of the fourth epoch, even knowing some hidden history. It's just a pity we don't have the means to exchange for the hidden history of the fourth epoch from her. What kind of existences are the Empress and the Fool? And after so many meetings, they still don't know the pathways of the Empress and the Fool. The Empress has never bought Beyonder potion formulas at the meetings, always buying only materials. Alger narrowed his eyes, feeling as if he was about to touch upon the answer. Derek, meanwhile, looked at them blankly, not understanding what they were discussing. The Abraham family, the fourth epoch, these were all extremely unfamiliar terms to him. He had never heard of them. "Actually, I have another question. What kind of Beyonder possesses the ability to control flames?" Audrey deliberated her words. "If I add this question, is the remuneration still enough? That range is a bit broad. Many Beyonders can control flames," Eve said with a smile. "Can you describe it in more detail? That way the price will also be cheaper. If you want to know about all Beyonders who can control flames, it's naturally not enough. Black, illusory flames." Audrey recalled Sherman's flames, extending a hand and waving it in front of her eyes. "They can suddenly appear on the hand. That sounds like a Beyonder from the assassin pathway. After becoming a Sequence 7 witch, they gain the ability to control flames," Eve replied. "Witch?" Audrey was stunned when she heard the name. With a hint of curiosity in her tone, she whispered, "How would a male act as a witch?" "Wear a skirt. Males will transform into females after becoming a witch." Eve's keen hearing easily caught all of Audrey's murmuring. Audrey, Alger, and Derek were all stunned. For a moment, Saphira Castle was unusually quiet. After a long pause, Audrey seemed to come back to her senses and murmured, "No wonder most Rose School of Thought members are female." Eve smiled and said, "The Rose School of Thought does not deceive males into becoming a witch. In fact, the moment they become an assassin, Beyonders will know that the Sequence 7 of the assassin pathway is called witch, and it will cause males to transform into females." A trace of shock flashed across Alger's face. It's just like gaining certain abilities and knowledge after consuming a Beyonder potion." Audrey listened with great interest. She wanted to ask more questions, such as which other pathways caused gender changes besides the assassin, but considering her remaining remuneration, after careful comparison, Audrey chose the information about the Abraham family. "I want to request a private exchange," Audrey said, raising her hand. Only after seeing the full nod did Audrey enthusiastically ask, "I want information about the Abraham family. All my remaining remuneration will be used to pay for information about the Abraham family." Eve nodded, indicating she understood. After deliberating for a few seconds, she began, "The Abraham family is an angel family from the fourth epoch." Angel. Audrey's pupils contracted sharply, and for a moment, she forgot her manners, directly interrupting Eve. "Ah, I'm sorry, Miss Empress, I was too surprised." A blush spread across Audrey's fair face, feeling ashamed of her impoliteness. Eve shook her head indifferently and said, "I can understand." She reorganized her words, then continued, during the Solomon Empire era, they once pledged allegiance to the Black Emperor, and later to the Blood Emperor, before declining in the fifth epoch. The Abraham family controls the apprentice pathway and also possesses numerous sealed artifacts, but they are deeply tormented by whispers. Every full moon, members of the Abraham family who walk the apprentice pathway will hear whispers, which leads to a high mortality rate and difficult advancements for Abraham family members, and is also a significant reason for the Abraham family's decline. The apprentice misjustice encountered is not necessarily from the Abraham family. Over the long years, the apprentice formula has also leaked out. However, apprentices who are not Abraham family members will not hear whispers. Misjustice can use this to probe. If that apprentice can hear whispers, then even if he is not an Abraham family member, he must be related to the Abraham family. Audrey's eyes lit up, and she praised in her heart that Miss Empress was truly a kind and friendly lady. The private exchange concluded, and Audrey was very satisfied, having traded 4 questions for an agate peacock egg. Moreover, Miss Empress had also provided some information beyond the questions. Alger looked at the two with some disappointment, yearning for information about the Abraham family. As a seasoned Beander, Alger understood the importance of information more than Audrey did. Derek showed no reaction. He still didn't understand what the three of them were saying, but Derek could vaguely guess that Miss Empress and the other two should be from another place entirely different from the City of Silver. The young man looked at the three of them, and after confirming that their transactions were complete, he spoke, I want the initial sequence formula for the Sun pathway. For a reader, an extra chapter will be added tomorrow. The Sun pathway. Bard. Alger immediately countered, his tone showing a hint of surprise. It was his first time hearing the Bard pathway referred to in such a way. Derek's voice held a touch of uncertainty. It should be. I lack understanding of it. The City of Silver doesn't have the sequence formulas for the Sun pathway. Alger narrowed his eyes, a thoughtful look on his face. I can obtain the Bard formula. You can exchange formulas from the City of Silver with me. Derek's eyes lit up, but then, realizing he didn't have any formulas himself at the moment, he showed a hint of guilt and immediately said, the City of Silver has formulas for the Giant pathway up to Sequence 4, Dragon pathway Sequence 9, Sequence 8, and Sequence 7 formulas, and also Shepherd pathway formulas, but only from Sequence 9 to Sequence 5. I can get any low sequence formula. Which one does Mr. Hanged Man need? Klein's mouth twitched, suppressing the urge to rub his forehead. This child, he's spilled all his secrets. Audrey maintained her spectator state, outwardly keeping an elegant and noble demeanor, but she was still slightly startled internally. She hadn't expected the City of Silver to possess so many formulas, making her even more curious about the City of Silver's exact location. If only I could go see it. Audrey thought with a hint of longing. The Giant pathway should be the Warrior pathway. But the Dragon pathway. The Dragon pathway. Alger continued to ask. The Sun's way of referring to pathways was a bit strange, which made him very curious. I haven't heard of this pathway. Derek was stunned and asked nervously, then does the Hanged Man need other formulas? As long as they are low sequence, I can get them. Alger shook his head and said, I need the Sailor pathway Sequence 5 formula, or a pair of dragon-eyed sea eagle eyeballs. Can you get them? Sailor pathway. Dragon-eyed sea eagle. Derek shook his head in disappointment, lowering his gaze to hide his feelings. Above the gray fog, a brief silence fell. The ancient castle seemed to be suspended in time, grand and mottled. Audrey's emerald eyes moved left and right, scanning around. After confirming that their transaction was over, she spoke, I need the psychiatrist formula. Psychiatrist. Never heard of it. Derek felt a bit disappointed and turned his gaze to the Empress, hoping that the formula or materials this lady needed would be something he could obtain. Eve felt Derek's gaze, smiled slightly, and turned her head to him, saying, the old name for psychiatrist is psychoanalyst. Derek's eyes lit up, and he immediately said, the City of Silver has the psychoanalyst formula. I can get it. Alger frowned and looked up at Derek. Is the Dragon pathway the spectator pathway? Why does he only know the old names? And why does the Empress know that the son only knows the old names? Audrey also noticed something, her brows furrowing slightly before quickly relaxing. She observed Derek once more and said, "That's wonderful. I will try to find the barred formula. If I don't find it, I will use gold pounds or materials as compensation. Is that acceptable?" "Gold pounds?" Derek asked in confusion. Eve explained, "It's a type of currency." Derek understood, then shook his head and said, "The City of Silver doesn't use gold pounds. Miss Justice can use materials as compensation. Gold pounds are the common currency of the northern and southern continents." Klein was speechless. He watched the sun reveal his background little by little, feeling somewhat numb. Audrey pursed her lips, then looked up, carefully observing the sun, and nodded. As expected, Audrey thought to herself. The trading session concluded, and next was the free discussion time. This time, the Empress didn't buy any potion formulas either. Alger pondered internally. He really wanted to know the Empress's pathway and sequence, but he couldn't possibly ask her directly, so he could only infer it from the formulas she bought. Alger took a deep breath, clearing his mind of stray thoughts. He tilted his head for a moment, then asked, "Miss Empress, I wanted to ask, is the sanctuary promoted by the Aurora Order the legendary Forsaken Land of the Gods?" Eve turned her head to Alger and said, "I can only tell you, yes. The remaining knowledge requires payment. Can gold pounds be used?" Audrey's eyes brightened, and she immediately asked, "Or other materials and formulas?" Although Derek didn't understand, he was listening intently. Eve held up 3 fingers and said, 1,000 pounds for 3 pieces of knowledge. Is that acceptable? However, allow me to remind you, Miss Justice, you don't need to know all the hidden knowledge and history, and in the Beander world, more knowledge isn't always better. Judging by Miss Justice's financial capacity, although she can afford 1,000 pounds, it's still a considerable expense for her, isn't it? Upon hearing this, Audrey looked up slightly and pondered for a few seconds. In the end, she agreed, her tone devoid of any hesitation or reluctance. Watching Audrey spend a fortune for knowledge, Klein and Alger fell silent. "Mr. Fool, I would like to request a private exchange," Audrey said, raising her hand. Her spectator state made her appear completely normal. Her perfect smile concealed the excitement and anticipation in the young girl's heart. The young girl's beautiful eyes looked at Eve, as if urging her to start quickly. Eve organized her words and began. "The first piece of knowledge, the Forsaken Land of the Gods is a product of the Great Calamity. The second piece of knowledge, as long as the correct method is found, everyone can enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods." Audrey was startled, almost unable to maintain her spectator state. "What is the correct method?" "The Sea of Ruins east of the Sonia Sea," Eve said, deliberating. "One can enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods through there, but it requires the true Creator's permission to enter, and without the protection of a high-level existence, one will be corrupted upon entry." "The true Creator's permission," Audrey repeated in her mind, feeling a faint unease and fear. As a spectator, she clearly knew where this feeling came from. It was humanity's fear of a god. She was exploring the secrets of a god. The third piece of knowledge, the gods and angels involved in the Forsaken Land of the Gods number in the double digits. It is not recommended for low to mid-sequence beyonders to explore. Audrey's pupils constricted, and she immediately exited her spectator state. She pressed her lips together tightly, unable to speak for a long time. Fear, unease, shock, and a hidden anticipation, a myriad of emotions surged into her heart, tangling like a ball of yarn within Audrey. Chapter 124, The Blessed. Even after their private conversation ended, Audrey was still a bit dazed. The information was too shocking for her, and she even regretted purchasing it. Gray mist swirled around everyone. The mottled ancient castle, plunged into silence, watched them silently, like an ancient king. Alger closed his eyes, concealing the intense curiosity and unwillingness within them. Eve scanned the room, taking in everyone, dazed, unwilling, bewildered. She chuckled softly and said, "I'll give you one more piece of knowledge for free." Her gaze swept over the members of the gathering one by one, finally settling on Derek. Derek noticed Eve's gaze, paused for 2 seconds, his heart thumping heavily and powerfully, revealing his inner tension. She slowly spoke. The hope of the forsaken land of the gods lies in the giant court. Saphira Castle was silent. Alger's clasped hands tightened, veins bulging on the back of his hands, as he tried to suppress the shock in his heart. Audrey's pupils contracted, and she instantly exited the spectator state she had just entered. Giant court. That was a legendary existence. Derek stood up immediately. The city of Silver was very close to the giant court, and he vaguely understood something. Miss Empress's words were directed at him. Thank you very much, Miss Empress, Mr. Fool. Derek's voice trembled slightly. So the city of Silver was in the forsaken land of the gods. So in their eyes, we had long been abandoned by the gods. Eve lowered her eyes, her lips moving a few times, and said, "No need to thank me. You can explore the giant court first, but you must constantly report your progress to Mr. Fool. There is a special existence there. When facing him, Mr. Fool's blessed will go to help you." Blessed. I don't have any blessed. Klein maintained the fool's leisurely demeanor on the surface, but inwardly, he had a headache. Him. Derek immediately caught this special pronoun and asked, "Is there an angel inside?" Eve nodded. Alger lowered his head, trying to conceal his shock. He had long suspected that the fool was a true god who had been active in the fourth epoch, and such an existence would certainly have angels who believed in him. But even hearing it, Alger was still shocked. There's an angel inside, the blessed who will help the sun, should also be an angel, right? Mr. Fool is truly amazing. Our tarot club is truly wonderful. A sense of pride swelled in Audrey's heart, and she thought excitedly that if she were at home, she would have already danced a small ancient elven dance. No, Audrey, you must be reserved. Audrey pressed her lips together, thinking happily. Klein thought the same as them, guessing in his heart whether his old sister wanted to find a reason to go herself. Eve scanned the room, knowing what they were thinking, and mused, not an angel, because that existence is very special. Although maintaining this misunderstanding would elevate Zhou Mingrui's image significantly in their hearts, it was a lie destined to be exposed. Moreover, for gods, having angels was normal. Then, Derek asked tentatively, "Is it Miss Empress?" "No, it's me," Klein thought expressionlessly. He had already guessed that if that blessed wasn't Eve, then it was most likely himself. Derek still remembered that when he first came here, he saw Miss Empress and Mr. Fool, guessing that Miss Empress might be Mr. Fool's blessed. Audrey was stunned for a moment. Although they had all long suspected it, she didn't expect the sun to ask directly. Alger's gaze remained on the Empress. Under everyone's gaze, Eve slowly shook her head and said, "It's not me. I am not Mr. Fool's blessed." Alger's pupils contracted, and his expression changed drastically. The hanged man's expression was ugly for a moment, then he quickly composed himself. He had always guessed that the Empress was someone from the Fool's faction, and an important figure at that. The Empress's consistent performance had also confirmed his suspicions. But now the Empress said she was not Mr. Fool's blessed. Although his previous conjectures would not be overturned, things had become somewhat complicated. Why didn't the Fool let his blessed participate in the tarot club, but the Empress instead? What kind of existence was the Empress in the Fool's faction? Audrey was also a little surprised. After realizing the relationship between Miss Empress and Mr. Fool, she had always thought that Miss Empress was Mr. Fool's blessed. "I'm very sorry," Derek said with a hint of apology, slowly sitting back on the bronze chair. Eve shook her head, indicating that she didn't mind. Audrey looked at the guilty Derek, then at Eve, feeling that she should say something. So she thought for 2 seconds and said, "Mr. Fool, if, and I mean if, I have the opportunity to join another organization, such as the Psychology Alchemists, would that be acceptable? I feel like Miss Justice will join the Psychology Alchemists in the future, Klein said in his heart. Miss Justice, do you still remember what you said before about not wanting to join a secret organization? Klein complained inwardly while chuckling and saying, no problem. My only requirement is that you must not reveal the existence of the Tarot Club. If you become a member of other organizations, the materials and intelligence you can use for exchange will certainly increase. His gaze swept over the members of the Tarot Club and he suddenly realized something. Eve was a Beyander of the Rose School of Thought, the Hanged Man was a Beyander of the Church of the Storm, the Sun was a Beyander of the City of Silver, and he himself was a Beyander of the Church of the Night. If Miss Justice also joined a Beyander organization, what kind of two-faced gathering was this? I understand. Then if I encounter a Beyander suitable for the Tarot Club, can I guide them to join? How do I guide them? Alger and Derek also looked up, their eyes filled with obvious thirst for knowledge. Those you deem suitable, you can tell me here, and I will decide whether to let them join. Before that, you must not make any suggestive actions, as that would lead to the leakage of the secret of the Tarot Club's existence. You must remember, for non-gathering members. Klein paused, then said in a deep voice. Without my permission, do not chant my name. The fools' words echoed in their hearts, causing them to involuntarily feel a sense of fear and obedience. Such words were not unfamiliar to them. Similar phrases appeared in the Apocalypse of Night and the Book of Storms. That was a god, solemn, condescending, a true god. Chapter 125, The Method. After the gathering ended, Klein leaned back, rubbing his temples with a slight headache. That dependence wouldn't be me, would it? Of course, Eve said as if it were obvious. Could it be me? Eve leaned to her right, resting her elbow on the armrest, speaking leisurely and calmly. Mr. Fool, you must advance quickly. It would be awkward if you haven't reached Sequence 4 by then. Sequence 4. Klein was confident about advancing to Sequence 4, but he didn't know how much time he had. How long will it take the City of Silver to explore the giant court? That depends on the City of Silver's performance, Eve said, standing up from the armrest, stretching, and walking towards Klein. Don't worry, they won't explore the giant court recklessly. You have plenty of time. The moment she finished speaking, Klein's high-backed chair rippled with light patterns. These patterns intertwined and merged with surging spirituality, gradually outlining a phantom and hazy door. Mysterious patterns clung to the door, depicting the symbol of the Fool. Klein was prepared. He immediately extended his spirituality towards the hazy door, joining in the vibration and stimulation. Above the ancient, unchanging gray fog, ripples spread out like stones dropped into a lake. Clang! Like a sigh from ancient times, the door slowly opened amidst a phantom and hazy sound. Miss Justice's prayer echoed in Klein's ears. Her sacrifice had arrived at Saphira Castle through the hazy sacrificial door. Eve stood beside Klein, steadily catching the agate peacock egg that belonged to her, but there was no £1,000 in cash. Even Miss Justice would find it difficult to obtain £1,000 in such a short time. Klein caught the 6 crystalline feathers of the Hanged Man's blue shadow falcon, placing them on the bronze long table, waiting for the Hanged Man to perform the bestowal ritual. Eve held the egg in both hands and said, I'm heading back first. Forsaken land of the gods. In a simple and dark house, a single candle flickered on a square wooden table. Derek lowered his gaze, staring blankly at the faint light, seemingly deep in thought. Thump, thump, thump. A faint knocking sound suddenly broke the silence. Derek snapped out of his thoughts, stood up, and quickly walked to the door to open it. A mature woman stood outside, holding a lamp, a look of worry on her face. When she saw him, it was as if a huge stone had been lifted from her, and her body relaxed slightly. But her worry didn't lessen. Instead, a hint of relief appeared in her eyes. Mother? Derek asked, is something wrong? No. Derek's mother managed a strained smile. She looked up at Derek, wanting to say something but suppressing it. In the end, she just looked at him worriedly and tentatively asked, how have you been feeling lately? As if realizing this sounded too deliberate, the woman added, "You're about to become a Beander, so you need to maintain a good state." "I'm fine, and..." Derek scratched the back of his head, lowered his gaze, and his lips moved a few times, but he didn't know how to speak. The woman's heart leapt into her throat. She looked at her son nervously, as if he would disappear before her eyes the next second. A rush of footsteps approached, and Derek's father appeared before them in a hurry. Hearing their conversation, Derek's father knew Derek had come out of his room. He immediately rushed over, running to his son's side. Seeing his son whole and normal, the man immediately breathed a sigh of relief. When Derek returned to his room, the couple had sensed something was wrong. Shortly after Derek left, they went to his room and knocked on the door. The result was no answer. They didn't know whether they should force the door open, so the couple would come and knock every now and then. Each time, there was no answer. Time and again, they felt as if they were experiencing the legendary winter, cold all over. The man gently pulled Derek closer. The tall, burly man's movements were unusually gentle and careful. He looked at Derek's back, scrutinizing him from head to toe, then asked with lingering concern, "Have you felt anything unusual?" "No." Derek immediately shook his head, a wave of guilt washing over him. "Father and mother already know. They're very worried." Derek lowered his head, his lips parting. "Father, mother, if I said I had a way to save the city of silver, would you believe me?" Derek's parents were stunned, looking at each other and seeing surprise and worry in each other's eyes. The woman tightly clutched the hem of her clothes, looking nervously at her husband and son. She was both hopeful and fearful of the method her son spoke of to save the city of silver. She naturally believed her son, but who knew if that existence was truly trustworthy? The man's lips trembled slightly. He looked at his son in disbelief, as if he had momentarily lost his voice, unable to utter a single word. Derek looked up, nervously watching his parents, unconsciously clutching and rubbing the corner of his clothes with his right hand. After a long while, the man opened his mouth, his voice trembling slightly as he asked, "Is it true?" Derek froze. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter the rest of his words. "Are Mr. Fool and Miss Queen trustworthy?" He didn't know. The man also saw Derek's predicament. He immediately withdrew his hand and said soothingly, "Derek, my son, don't worry. We will always believe in you." They themselves couldn't confirm whether that existence was trustworthy, so why should they make Derek make that judgment? The woman also said softly, "Tell us, what is the method?" Derek looked up at his parents, feeling much calmer, and said, "It's the giant court. The hope of the city of silver lies in the giant court. We must explore the giant court." The giant court. The two were not unfamiliar with the giant court. The city of silver was once ruled by giants, and it wasn't far from the giant court. "We understand," Derek's father said with a serious expression, trying hard to maintain a reliable fatherly demeanor in front of his child. "We will figure out a way for this matter. Don't worry too much. You have your own task, Derek, and that is to find a psychoanalyst to examine yourself." Derek nodded. He knew his parents needed a private space to discuss this matter, so he obediently left. After watching their son leave the house, Derek's parents sat opposite each other in chairs, their faces grim. The man seemed to have aged considerably. He sat in the chair, silently blaming himself. The woman held her husband's hand and asked anxiously, "We must find a way to tell the elders about this method." The city of silver had struggled in the darkness for too long, not a single ray of light could be missed. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.